She wasn't supposed to tell him anything. Margaret Grant had kept the secret for 8 months, long enough to convince herself it wasn't her place, long enough to watch two people she cared about drift in opposite directions without ever knowing the other existed. She was just a seamstress, a retired mother, a woman with too many opinions and the good sense, usually, to keep them to herself. But then Ethan Brooks showed up at her door on a freezing Tuesday morning to move a dresser, and something shifted. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Like and follow so you don't miss what happens next. The dresser had been sitting in Margaret Grant's downstairs hallway for 11 days. It wasn't a particularly remarkable piece of furniture, so solid oak, dark walnut stain, 6 drawers with brass handles that had gone slightly green at the edges from age. It had belonged to Margaret's mother, then to Margaret herself, and now it was supposed to belong to the newly renovated guest bedroom on the second floor of her narrow Victorian townhouse in Millbrook, Connecticut. The problem was that the dresser weighed somewhere close to 200 pounds. The staircase turned at a 90-degree angle halfway up, and Margaret's neighbors, despite being perfectly friendly people, were either too old, too busy, or too smart to volunteer for the job. She had called a moving company 3 weeks earlier. They quoted her $400 for a 2-hour minimum. She'd thanked them politely and hung up the phone and then stood in her hallway staring at the dresser like it had personally offended her. That was how the dresser had survived 11 days in the hallway. On the 12th day, she called Ethan Brooks. Ethan got the call on a Tuesday morning while he was eating cereal over the kitchen sink and listening to his daughter argue with her backpack. "It won't zip," Lily announced from the living room, her voice carrying the particular brand of 7-year-old fury that treats minor inconveniences like natural disasters. "Pull the sides together first," he called back. "I am." "Then pull harder." A pause. Then a victorious grunt, followed by the sound of a zipper completing its journey. Ethan exhaled, took another spoonful of cereal, and his phone buzzed against the counter. Margaret Grant. He stared at the name for a moment before answering. "Mrs. Grant?" "Ethan?" Her voice was warm but slightly formal, the way it always was, like she was conducting a business call she genuinely enjoyed. "I'm sorry to bother you this early. I have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The furniture kind." A brief pause. "I have a dresser. It needs to go upstairs. It's very heavy, and I'm very short, and I've been staring at it for nearly 2 weeks. Ethan set down his spoon. He and Sophia had been over for more than half a year. The breakup had been civil, almost uncomfortably so. Two people who had realized, somewhere around the 18-month mark, that they cared about each other without being in love with each other, which turned out to be a much lonelier discovery than either of them expected. There had been no fight, no dramatic scene, just a long conversation on a Saturday afternoon that ended with both of them slightly relieved and slightly sad, which was maybe the most honest thing that had ever happened between them. He had liked Margaret, though. She'd always treated him like a person instead of an accessory to her daughter's life, which he had come to understand was less common than it should be. "What time?" he asked. "Would 9:30 work? I know you're busy." 9:30 works. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway with her backpack successfully zipped, wearing one shoe. "Who was that?" "Someone who needs help moving something." "Can I come?" "You have school." She looked at him with the expression she had been perfecting lately, somewhere between resigned and betrayed. "School is so long," she said, which was not an argument so much as a statement of personal philosophy, and she delivered it with such weary conviction that Ethan had to look away to keep from laughing. "Go find your other shoe," he said. What? He dropped Lily off at Clearwater Elementary at 8:55 and drove the 12 minutes to Margaret's townhouse on Alderman Street with the heat on full and a travel mug of coffee wedged between his knees. December in Connecticut had decided to skip the pleasant part and go straight to punishing. Gray sky pressed down low, the kind of cold that found the gap between your collar and your jaw and made itself comfortable there. Margaret answered the door before he knocked. She was already wearing what she called her working clothes, a fitted wool cardigan over dark trousers, reading glasses pushed up into her silver hair, and she held the door open with one hand and gestured toward the hallway with the other like a stage manager pointing an actor to their mark. It's right there, she said. Don't take your coat off yet. The dresser was enormous. He saw that immediately. Okay, he said. The staircase turns, that's the problem. I measured twice and I believe it can fit, but it can fit, Ethan said, more out of professional stubbornness than actual certainty. He'd been installing custom cabinetry for 9 years. He'd moved furniture through spaces that didn't deserve to be called spaces. He looked at the staircase, mentally rotated the dresser, adjusted for the angle of the turn, and felt a familiar quiet settle into him. The kind that came when a physical problem presented itself, and his body understood what his mind was still working out. Are you sure? Pretty sure. That is not the same as sure. No, he agreed. It's not. They spent the next hour and 40 minutes moving the dresser. It was brutal. The turn in the staircase was worse than he'd estimated. The dresser had to be tilted at an angle that defied physics and comfort simultaneously, and at one point Margaret herself was on the stairs with both hands braced against the side, pushing with considerably more strength than her frame suggested she possessed, while Ethan held the bulk of the weight from below and tried to breathe through it. Left, she said. Your left. This is my left. That's not left. Mrs. Grant, I know which side is my left. Then use it. He used it. The dresser moved 6 inches. They both stood still for a moment, catching their breath. You're stronger than you look, he said. I know, she said, without any particular pride. Just a fact. My late husband used to say the same thing. He meant it as a complaint. By the time they maneuvered the dresser into the guest bedroom, Ethan's back had registered a formal complaint. His right shoulder ached in a way that suggested tomorrow would be interesting, and Margaret had made 2 cups of tea and placed one on the nightstand beside him without asking whether he wanted it. He sat on the edge of the bed, flexed his fingers, and drank the tea, which was too hot and too sweet and exactly right. Margaret stood near the window. She wasn't looking at the dresser. She was looking at him. He noticed, but said nothing. She crossed to the bedroom door and closed it. That was when Ethan understood that the dresser had not been the point. I've been thinking about how to say this for 8 months, Margaret began. She didn't sit. She stood near the closed door with her arms folded loosely, not defensively, more like she was holding herself steady. And I've decided that the honest version is the only version worth saying, so I'm going to say it plainly, and you can decide what to do with it. Ethan set down his mug. Okay. Sophia has moved on. I thought you should know, if you didn't already. She's seen someone. It's been about 4 months. He sat with that for a moment. He searched himself for the sting he expected to find, the way you press a bruise to check whether it still hurts. He found something closer to relief. Not the uncomplicated kind, but the real kind. The kind that comes with a little sadness mixed in, like finally setting down something you'd been carrying without realizing it. Good for her, he said. He meant it. Margaret studied him. I believe you, she said, and the relief in her voice was audible. I wasn't sure how you'd take it. It was mutual, Sophia and I. He paused, trying to find the right words for something that had never had very clean words. We wanted different things, that was all it was. I don't have hard feelings. I know you don't. That's actually part of why I'm telling you the rest. Ethan looked at her. The rest. Margaret unfolded her arms, crossed to the small armchair by the window, and sat down. She smoothed the front of her cardigan once, a gesture he recognized from Sophia, the unconscious habit that passed down through generations without permission. And then she looked at him directly. In the years I've known you, she said, I've formed an opinion. I want to tell it to you, and I want you to understand that it has nothing to do with Sophia, and it's not a reflection on anyone who came before or after. It's simply what I've observed. All right. You're a good man, Ethan, not in the way people use that phrase to be polite. I mean it concretely. She held up a hand before he could respond. You raised your daughter alone from the time she was 14 months old without making her feel the weight of that. I watched you show up for Sophia during the hard parts of her life and ask for very little in return. I watched you build something honest for yourself with nothing given to you, and I watched you end a relationship without cruelty because you respected the person even when the love had run out. Those are not small things. Ethan was quiet. He was not, by nature, a man who absorbed compliments gracefully. He looked down at his tea mug. "Mrs. Grant, I'm not finished." He looked up. "I have a friend," she said. "Her name is Victoria Sterling." The name didn't register immediately. Then it did. Victoria Sterling had been on the cover of Forbes, Time, and probably several other publications that Ethan didn't read, but that his coworker Danny had described in vivid detail over lunch one afternoon the previous year, having just read an article about her on his phone. 30 years old. Started 3 companies before she was 25. The software platform was worth like $4 billion? Maybe more. Something about logistics AI. You see the picture of her? Crazy. Ethan had nodded in the way you nodded when someone described a world that had approximately nothing to do with your own. "The technology CEO," he said carefully. "Yes." Margaret allowed a small, knowing look. "Kitty, I've known Victoria since she was 22 years old. Her company was a single server in a rented office at the time. We met through a charity board. She'd been volunteering since she was in college, which most people don't know about her. We became close over the years." She paused. "She's one of the best people I've ever known, and she has been quietly lonely for a very long time." Ethan said nothing. "Victoria has dated. Of course she has, but there's a problem that comes with a certain kind of success, and I don't say this to sound cynical. It's simply a logistical reality. When you're worth what Victoria is worth, and when you're known the way she's known, people stop seeing you at some point. They start seeing the asset, the opportunity, the story they want to tell about themselves." Margaret's voice was careful, not dramatic, matter of fact. "She's become very good at identifying it, which means she's also become very careful, sometimes too careful to let anything real in." "Why are you telling me this?" Ethan asked. His voice came out more cautious than he intended. "Because I've watched you for 2 years, and you are the only man I've met who I genuinely believe would not do that to her." Margaret picked up her own tea mug from the windowsill. "You're not easily impressed. You've built a life around what's real. You care about your daughter more than your pride, which is a rare quality. And when Sophia's interest in you cooled, you let go with grace." She took a sip of tea. "I'm not playing matchmaker in the romantic comedy sense. I'm not trying to arrange something. I'm telling you about a person I love who has been waiting, without knowing she's waiting, for someone who will see her as a person first. And I'm telling you because you deserve to know such a person exists." The room was quiet. Outside, a car passed on Alderman Street. The December wind pressed against the window glass. "I'm a cabinet installer," Ethan said. "I live in a 2-bedroom house. I drive a 2019 F150 with a dent in the rear quarter panel that I keep meaning to fix." "I know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this." "Whatever you choose." Margaret reached into the pocket of her cardigan and produced a small card. Cream-colored, no logo, just a name and an email address handwritten in dark ink. Or nothing, that's also a valid choice. She stood and crossed the room and held it out to him. He took it, turned it over in his hand. The handwriting was neat and confident, Victoria Sterling, followed by what appeared to be a personal email address, the kind that wasn't a corporate account. "She doesn't know you have this," he said. It wasn't a question. "She doesn't know she's having this conversation," Margaret agreed. "When, and if, you reach out, the introduction is yours to make. I won't be involved beyond this room." He looked at her. "You could have just told me this in the hallway," he said. "You didn't need the dresser." Margaret smiled. It was a small, unapologetic smile that reminded him, suddenly and sharply, of why Sophia had turned out the way she had. "I needed to know what kind of man would show up," she said simply. "The dresser told me." Tom. He drove home in a kind of dazed silence, the card sitting on the passenger seat. He didn't pick it up at red lights. He didn't look at it. He was very conscious of not looking at it, which was its own kind of looking. He picked Lily up from school at 3:15. She got into the truck still wearing her backpack, which she never took off until she was fully inside the house, a habit she'd developed sometime in 2nd grade for reasons she had never explained and that Ethan had long stopped trying to understand. "How was your day?" he asked. "Fine." She buckled her seatbelt. "We did fractions." "How are fractions?" "Terrible." She looked out the window. Are fractions useful? Like in real life? Yeah, actually. What for? Measuring things, cooking, splitting a check evenly so nobody gets ripped off. She considered this. I'm going to need them for pizza, she concluded. Probably. She leaned her head against the window and watched the streets go by. She had her mother's eyes, or at least Ethan assumed she did from the photographs, and his quietness, which people sometimes mistook for shyness, but was really just a preference for listening over filling silence. At 7 years old, she had already developed the particular stillness of someone who processed things more carefully than other people noticed. Dad, she said, about a minute from home. Yeah. You look like you're thinking about something. Just work stuff. She looked at him sideways. It doesn't look like work stuff. He glanced at her. What does work stuff look like? Like when you're figuring out measurements. Your mouth goes flat. She demonstrated a subtly compressed mouth expression that was, Ethan had to admit, embarrassingly accurate. Right now your mouth looks different, like when you found out Grandma was sick. The comparison landed somewhere uncomfortable. His mother's diagnosis had come 8 months ago. Early stage, treatable. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. He'd spent the better part of a week walking around with exactly that face, apparently. It's not bad, he said. Nobody's sick. I just had a weird conversation today. With who? Someone you don't know. Lily returned to the window. She seemed to accept this. Then, was it a good weird or a bad weird? Ethan thought about Margaret closing the bedroom door, the card sitting on the passenger seat beside him, a name he'd seen in a magazine belonging to a woman who had been quietly lonely for a long time. I don't know yet, he said honestly. She nodded as if this were a completely reasonable answer, which, he supposed, it was. That night, after dinner, after Lily's bath, after the book they were working through, a chapter book about a girl who accidentally adopted a dragon, which Lily took with absolute seriousness, after she was asleep and the house had settled into the particular quiet that two-bedroom houses get after 8 p.m., Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a beer and the card. He turned it over a few times. Victoria Sterling. The email address was simple. Gmail, not a corporate domain. Margaret had presumably passed along something private, a personal account rather than the public-facing address that probably went to a team of assistants and PR people. He thought about what Margaret had said. The only man I've met who I genuinely believe would not do that to her. He turned the card over again. The honest truth, the one he didn't say out loud to anyone, including himself, with full clarity, was that the past 6 months had been fine. Lily was healthy and happy. Work was steady. He'd fixed the bathroom tile he'd been putting off, cleaned out the garage, started running again in a half-hearted way that nonetheless counted as a start. He'd been okay. But okay, he had learned, had a weight to it that people didn't talk about. Okay meant competent and functional and empty in the quiet parts. Okay meant watching Lily sleep and feeling the full sum of everything he loved and then turning out the light and walking back to a kitchen where the only person he talked to all day was a 7-year-old about dragons. He put the card down. He opened his laptop. He found her name in about 4 seconds. The Forbes article was the first result. Then a TechCrunch profile. A brief mention in a Wall Street Journal piece about the logistics software sector. A photograph from a tech conference in San Francisco. She was at a podium, mid-sentence, one hand slightly raised, wearing a simple dark blazer with her hair pulled back. She was looking directly at the camera with an expression that was composed and clear, and somehow, despite the expensive blazer and the conference podium and the headline calling her a disruptive force in enterprise logistics, slightly tired. He looked at the photograph for a moment longer than he intended. Then he closed the laptop. He held off for 4 days. He wasn't being coy. He wasn't playing strategy. He genuinely didn't know what to say or whether to say it at all. And he had learned long ago that acting before you knew your own mind was how you ended up in situations you couldn't navigate out of cleanly. On the 4th day, Lily came home from school with a permission slip for a winter concert on December 19th and informed him with great authority that she needed a new dress because the one from last year made her look like a lamp. He was not entirely sure what this meant, but he took it seriously. "We'll go this weekend," he said. Promise? Promise. She seemed satisfied, went to find her after-school snack, and left him standing in the kitchen doorway. He stood there for a moment. Then he went to his room, found the card where he'd left it on his dresser, the dresser he'd had since college, which was significantly less elegant than Margaret's, and had a broken bottom drawer he'd reinforced with wood glue and stubbornness, and sat on the edge of his bed and opened his email on his phone. He typed for about 4 minutes, deleted it, typed again, deleted half of it, and landed on this. Boss, Miss Sterling, my name is Ethan Brooks. We have a mutual friend in Margaret Grant who gave me your contact information with the suggestion that we might have something worth saying to each other. I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure what that something is, and I don't want to start a conversation under false pretenses. So I'll just say, she thought highly enough of you to tell me about you, and she's a hard person to impress. If you're open to a conversation, I'd be glad to have one. No expectations on my end. Ethan. Icho. He read it twice. It was not elegant. It was not charming. It was, he thought, at least honest, which was the only thing he actually knew how to be. He sent it before he could change his mind. He put his phone face down on the mattress and went to start dinner. 47 minutes later, between the pasta water coming to a boil and Lily setting the table in the cheerfully haphazard way she'd developed as a contribution to household tasks, his phone buzzed. He almost knocked the wooden spoon off the counter, grabbing it. Mr. Brooks, Margaret is one of the few people on earth I trust unconditionally, which means you've passed a filter that most people would find inconveniently rigorous. I appreciate the honesty in your message, especially the part where you admitted you don't know what the something is. Neither do I, honestly. But I think not knowing but willing to find out is probably the best starting position for most worthwhile things. Would you be available for coffee next week? I'm in Hartford Tuesday through Thursday. Victoria, Ethan read it twice, became aware that Lily was watching him from the other side of the kitchen counter, and put his phone down with the careful control of a man who is working hard to appear normal. Was that work? Lily asked, with the skeptical tone of someone who has already concluded the answer is no. Setting something up for next week, he said. Oh. She arranged the last fork with an air of ceremony. Is it the weird conversation person? He looked at her. She looked back at him with 7-year-old patience that contained, somehow, a great deal of wisdom. Yeah, he said. It is. She nodded seriously, as if this confirmed a theory she'd been developing. Is she nice? Lily asked. Ethan turned back to the stove. I honestly have no idea, he said. And that, he thought, as the pasta water finally boiled and the kitchen filled with steam and his daughter hummed something tuneless to herself at the table, was maybe the most hopeful thing he'd said in months. The cafe Ethan picked was called Groundwork, on the corner of Trumbull and Asylum in downtown Hartford. He'd chosen it for no sophisticated reason. He'd been there twice before. The coffee was good, the tables were real wood instead of the fake reclaimed kind, and it was the sort of place that didn't make you feel underdressed or overdressed regardless of what you walked in wearing. That last part mattered more than he wanted to admit when he was getting dressed Tuesday morning. He stood in front of his closet for longer than he had stood in front of a closet in years. Not because he was vain, he genuinely wasn't, but because he was trying to solve a problem that didn't have clean parameters. What did you wear to coffee with someone who had been photographed at international conferences and profiled in publications that used words like visionary without apparent embarrassment? He didn't own anything that would close that gap, and he wasn't sure trying to close it was the right instinct anyway. He put on dark jeans, a gray Henley, and his better work boots, the ones without the paint. He looked in the mirror for approximately 2 seconds and decided that was enough. Lily was at school. His morning had been normal. Cereal, backpack argument, school drop-off, except for the low-grade hum of something that wasn't quite nerves but was adjacent to them. He was 32 years old. He'd been in relationships. He'd had first dates. None of them had begun with a Forbes cover and a handwritten card from an ex-girlfriend's mother, but he assumed the basic mechanics were roughly the same. He got to Groundwork 12 minutes early, ordered a black coffee, and sat at a corner table facing the door. He watched 3 people walk in before she did. Victoria Sterling came through the door at 10:02, 2 minutes late, wearing a dark coat over what appeared to be a simple black turtleneck, carrying nothing except her phone in one hand and a slight expression of someone scanning a room with the practiced efficiency of a person who spent a lot of time in unfamiliar environments. She spotted him before he could fully process that she'd arrived. He saw the moment of recognition, a small adjustment in her posture, and crossed the room without hesitation. She was taller than he'd expected from the photographs, maybe 5'8". Her hair was down, dark, slightly uneven at the ends in a way that suggested she didn't spend a lot of time worrying about it. She had the kind of face that photographs flattened, more expressive in person, less composed, the tiredness he'd noticed in that conference photo visible in a way that made her look unexpectedly more approachable rather than less. "Ethan Brooks," she said. Not a question. She put her hand out. He shook it. "Victoria Sterling." "Victoria's fine." She sat down across from him, set her phone face down on the table, and looked at him with a directness that most people would have softened with a smile first. "I want to say something before we do the regular getting to know you part." "Okay." "I almost canceled this morning." He hadn't expected that. "Why didn't you?" She considered this with the seriousness of someone who'd been asking herself the same thing. "Because Margaret has never steered me wrong, not once in 8 years. And because," she paused, seemed to make a small internal decision, "because the email you sent was the most honest, cold message I've ever received. And I've received a lot of messages from people who wanted something from me, and I could tell immediately that yours wasn't one of them." "I wasn't sure about sending it," he said. "I could tell that too." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile yet. "What made you?" "Honestly, I sat with it for 4 days and I couldn't come up with a good reason not to, other than fear of looking stupid, which is not a reason I'm willing to accept from myself anymore." She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned toward the counter. "I need to order something before I say anything else, or I'll have this entire conversation on an empty stomach and make worse decisions than usual." A server came by. Victoria ordered a cortado and a pastry she pointed at without reading what it was, which Ethan noted without comment. She didn't look at the menu at all. Not from arrogance, but from the particular efficiency of someone who made so many decisions daily that conserving that capacity wherever possible had become instinct. When the server left, she turned back and said, "Tell me about your daughter." It was not where he'd expected the conversation to go. He'd mentally prepared for the mutual background portion, jobs, histories, the standard scaffolding of introduction, and her directness bypassed all of that with what he was beginning to recognize as characteristic precision. "Her name is Lily," he said. "She's 7. She has opinions about fractions and strong feelings about lamp-shaped dresses." Something genuinely shifted in Victoria's expression. Lamp-shaped dresses. She wanted a new dress for her winter concert. She described the old one as making her look like a lamp. I don't entirely understand the comparison, but I took it seriously. That's exactly the right response. Victoria's cortado arrived. She wrapped both hands around it. "How long have you been raising her alone?" "Since she was 14 months old." He said it the way he always said it, plainly, without the performance of suffering that some people seem to expect. It was simply the fact of his life, the central organizing fact, and he'd long stopped needing it to be anything other than what it was. Her mother? Not in the picture, by her own choice. He paused. There's more to that story, but it's not the interesting part. The interesting part is Lily. Victoria studied him. "What's the interesting part about Lily?" He thought about it genuinely, rather than reaching for something that would sound good. "She's quiet in the way that makes people underestimate her, and then she'll say something so accurate about a situation that you feel briefly embarrassed for everyone in the room, including yourself." He took a sip of coffee. "Last week she told me that her teacher was sad but trying to hide it by talking too much. She was right. The teacher's father had just died. We found out later." "She told you that like it was just information? Like it was obvious?" Kids are like that sometimes. They see what adults are working too hard to conceal. Victoria was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet, Ethan noticed something he hadn't been able to see in photographs or articles. She was a listener. Not the polite kind who waited for their turn to speak, but the actual kind. The kind where you could tell her silence was working. I don't have that, she said finally. The ability to read people quietly. I tend to go straight at things. I noticed, he said, without making it a criticism. She almost smiled. Does that bother you? No, I find it easier than wondering what people actually mean. She picked up her pastry. It turned out to be a cheese Danish, which she ate without ceremony, and said, What do you do exactly? Margaret told me you install cabinetry. Custom cabinetry. Mostly residential, some commercial. Kitchen installations, built-ins, closet systems. I run a small crew, yeah. Me and 2 other guys. We work mostly in Hartford County, sometimes up into Litchfield. You like it? Yeah. He said it without qualifying it, which was apparently notable because she looked at him like she was calibrating something. I'm good at it, and the work is concrete. At the end of a day, I can look at a wall that was nothing in the morning and is something now. I find that valuable. He paused. Most people expect me to be apologetic about it. Why would you be apologetic about work you're good at and find meaningful? Because it doesn't come with a title people recognize at dinner parties. Victoria set down her Danish. I have been to approximately 400 dinner parties, she said, and the most interesting conversation I had at any of them was with the woman who ran the parking structure. She was 53, had a degree in civil engineering, and had made a conscious decision at 38 to stop chasing a career that was making her into someone she didn't like. She managed the parking structure and went home to her husband and her garden and her mystery novels, and she was the only person in the room who seemed genuinely at peace. Ethan looked at her. Did you stay in touch with her? No, I wanted to. I got pulled into a conversation about Series B funding rounds, and I looked up 20 minutes later, and she was gone. Victoria's voice had something in it that was not quite regret, but was close. I think about her sometimes. That says something about you. Probably not anything flattering. I was going to say it suggests you know the difference between impressive and good. She went still. Just for a moment. A fraction of stillness that he almost missed. Then she picked up her cortado and looked somewhere to the left of him, not avoiding the comment but processing it, which he was beginning to understand was what she did with things that landed. Margaret said you ended your relationship with Sophia without cruelty, she said, coming back to him. She said you let it go gracefully. Margaret gives me more credit than I deserve. I was also sad about it. He looked at the table. Sophia was... She was good to me for a long time. We just wanted different things. She wanted to move, build something new somewhere else. I couldn't. Lily was in school, my business was here, my mother is an hour away, and her health's been complicated this year. He looked up. There's no villain in that story. Sometimes things are just genuinely incompatible. That kind of honesty is rare, Victoria said. It shouldn't be. No, she agreed. It shouldn't be. The cafe was filling up around them. The late-morning Hartford crowd, a mix of office workers on break and students and the semi-permanent laptop population. And Ethan noticed that Victoria had not once looked at her phone, which was still face down on the table. For someone who ran a company with several thousand employees and operations across 12 countries, the sustained attention she was giving this conversation felt, he thought, like something deliberate. Like she had made a choice, somewhere around the cheese Danish, to be fully in this room. He found it unexpectedly moving, and then felt slightly foolish about finding it moving, and then decided the feeling was accurate and he should just sit with it. Can I ask you something? He said, and will you tell me if it's overstepping? Yes to the first part. Unclear on the second. I'll know when I hear it. Margaret described you as quietly lonely, her words. He held eye contact. I'm asking because I want to understand, not because I'm trying to catch you in something. Victoria's face did not close. That was the thing he noticed. A lot of people, when you said something they weren't expecting, something that touched something real, their face would close like a shop pulling its shutters down, and they'd redirect with something charming or deflecting. Victoria's face stayed open. She looked at him with the expression of someone who was deciding how honest to be, and then clearly decided to be fully honest, and he watched her arrive at that decision in real time. My company crossed $2 billion in valuation when I was 27, she said. I remember sitting in a conference room after the announcement, and everyone was celebrating, and someone handed me a glass of champagne, and I was smiling and thinking, she paused, I should call someone. Someone I can tell this to who will understand why I'm not as happy as I'm supposed to be. She looked down at her cortado. I couldn't think of a person. I had staff and advisors and investors and colleagues, and 3 people I'd call real friends, but they were all scattered across different time zones, and I didn't want to call someone for a conversation that had to be scheduled a week out. She looked back up. I wanted to come home and tell someone I was tired and confused and not sure what came next. That's all. Just tell someone the ordinary version. The cafe noise filled the space between them. Did you call anyone? He asked. I called Margaret, a small, dry sound that was almost a laugh. She told me to eat something and sleep and call her in the morning when I wasn't running on caffeine and adrenaline, which was exactly the right advice. And I did, and I felt better, and then I went and did it all again for the next 3 years. And the lonely part didn't change. The lonely part, Victoria said carefully, got more sophisticated. I got better at managing it, better at filling the hours, filling the calendar, better at the social performance of being Victoria Sterling, because that's a performance, by the way, just so you know. The Forbes version of me has maybe 30% overlap with the actual person. She gestured at herself. The turtleneck, the undone hair, the half-eaten Danish. This is closer. Which part's the 30%? She thought about it. The ambition is real. The drive to build things that function, that solve actual problems, that's real. The part about loving the spotlight and the exclusive events and the rooms full of people who want to shake my hand because of my balance sheet, she shook her head. That's costume. Ethan nodded slowly. He believed her. He had no particular reason to, except that nothing about the way she said it felt rehearsed, and rehearsed was something he was good at detecting. He'd learned it slowly, the hard way, in the particular school of disappointment that life ran for single fathers of small children, where you had to learn quickly what was real and what was convenient, because there wasn't margin to get it wrong. What does your day actually look like? He asked. Not the article version. Up at 5:30, usually, not by choice. I just stopped sleeping. I read for an hour, mostly industry reports and occasionally actual books if I'm not behind on everything. Meetings from 8, too many meetings. I've been trying to push back some of the advisory calls because I have a director-level team that could handle 60% of what ends up on my calendar, but the people scheduling don't always trust that yet. She rubbed the side of her neck, an unconscious gesture. Lunch at my desk, usually. I forget sometimes. My assistant leaves snacks on my desk like she's feeding a difficult animal. Despite himself, Ethan laughed. It came out unrehearsed and real. Something changed in Victoria's face at the sound of it. It was subtle. A slight softening, like a muscle she'd been holding taut for a long time, released a fraction of its tension. What? She said, but she was almost smiling. The difficult animal, he said. My daughter has the same strategy. She puts snacks next to me when I'm on a long phone call. She figured it out on her own when she was 5. A 7-year-old and my executive assistant have arrived at the same management solution. Victoria picked up the last piece of her Danish. That's either a comment on my assistant's sophistication or my emotional development. I haven't decided which. Maybe both. Probably both, she agreed. They talked for another 2 hours. Ethan was aware, around the 90-minute mark, that they'd moved past the cautious stage, the one where you chose your words to create an impression, and into something more unguarded. It happened incrementally, the way temperature changes in a room. You didn't notice the shift until you realized you were warm. She told him about her first company, which had failed inside of 14 months and had cost her her savings and a relationship and several months of sleeping badly. She told it without self-pity, with the casual honesty of someone who had filed the failure under necessary education and moved forward. But he could hear the texture of it, the sleepless nights, the investor calls that went nowhere. The day she had to tell 6 people their jobs no longer existed and had sat in her car in a parking garage afterward and cried. She'd been 24. He told her about the morning he'd come home from the hospital with Lily. 14 months old, a social worker, a car seat he'd installed 3 times because he kept second-guessing himself, a house that had felt suddenly and enormously ill-equipped for what was coming. He told her about the first week, which he still thought of as the week that should not have been survivable. When Lily had screamed for 4 hours straight one night, and Ethan had sat on the bathroom floor and very seriously considered whether he was actually capable of doing this. His mother had called at 2 in the morning, he still didn't know how she'd known to call, and talked to him for 45 minutes about nothing in particular, just her voice on the line, and Lily had eventually exhausted herself and gone quiet. "You stayed," Victoria said. "She was my daughter." A lot of people would have found a reason not to. Maybe. He set down his coffee cup, which had been empty for a while. "I don't think I'm particularly heroic for it. It was just, she needed someone to stay. And I was there, so I stayed." Victoria looked at him for a long moment without speaking. He had the feeling she was doing that calibration thing again, running whatever she was hearing through whatever internal system she used to distinguish real from performed. "I believe you," she said, at last. The way she said it was quiet, not the polite kind of "I believe you," but the kind that meant this is information I'm keeping. It was close to 12:30 when they finally looked at the time. The cafe had cycled through 2 rounds of customers while they sat there, and neither of them had noticed. "I have a call at 1, Victoria said, with the tone of someone who has just remembered an obligation they'd been successfully ignoring. "I've got to pick up materials from a supplier by 2. He signaled for the check. She didn't fight him for it. She watched him produce his card with a neutral expression that didn't look like it was concealing anything, and he appreciated that. He'd braced for a kind of awkwardness around money, and it didn't come. They stood and put on their coats. The December outside the window was the same gray and punishing as it had been when he walked in, but it looked, he thought, slightly different. Not literally. He understood he was projecting, but different. At the door, Victoria stopped and turned to him. "I want to be honest about something," she said. "Okay." "I came into this expecting to be politely uninterested. I thought it would be a perfectly pleasant hour with someone Margaret likes, and I'd be able to say I tried and we'd both go back to our separate lives with no harm done." She zipped her coat, a small, precise motion. "That's not what happened." Ethan looked at her. The morning light, even diluted by December cloud, caught the lines of her face with a clarity that the conference photos had never managed. "I know," he said. "I don't know what I'm suggesting," she said. "I want to be transparent about that. I have a complicated life, and you have a daughter, and I'm in Hartford 2 weeks out of every 6, and I don't—" She paused, seemed to make herself slow down. "I don't want to treat this carelessly. I've treated things carelessly before, and I'm not willing to do it again." "That's a fair position," he said. "Is it?" "It's honest, which is more useful than fair." She looked at him for a moment. Outside, a cab went by on Trumbull Street, and somewhere down the block a door banged in the wind. "Would you want to do this again?" she asked. No structure, no expectation, just again. "Yeah," he said, "I would." She nodded once, decisive, the way she seemed to make all her decisions, even the uncertain ones, and pulled open the cafe door. The cold came in like a wave. "I'll email you," she said. "I'll be less than 4 days this time," he said. She looked back over her shoulder as she went out, and this time the almost smile became an actual one, set. Brief, slightly crooked, real in a way that the composed conference expression never was. And then she was through the door and into the Hartford morning. Ethan stood at the door for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and called his business partner, Marco, to say he'd be late to the supplier. "How late?" Marco asked. "Not that late. I just need a minute." "A minute for what?" Ethan looked through the glass door at the street, at the city going about its business in the cold, at the space where Victoria had been 30 seconds ago. "I don't know yet," he said. "I'll tell you when I figure it out." He stood there another moment, alone in the doorway between the warmth of the cafe and the December outside, holding the phone against his ear while Marco said something about the lumber order and the afternoon schedule. And Ethan heard the words without fully processing them, because part of his mind was still in the conversation, still in the 2 hours that had just happened, still in the small, precise motion of a coat being zipped and the almost smile becoming real. He had not felt this specific feeling in a long time. He wasn't even sure he'd ever felt it exactly this way. He stepped outside into the cold and started walking. The second meeting happened 9 days later on a Thursday evening, and it was Victoria's suggestion. She was back in Hartford for a 3-day stretch of meetings and had emailed him on Wednesday afternoon with characteristic directness. "Are you free Thursday evening? I'd suggest dinner, but I want to be transparent. That dinner feels like a category of thing neither of us is ready to name yet. Coffee again, or a walk?" V. He'd read it twice, appreciated both the honesty and the slightly awkward precision of it, and replied, "Walk. There's a stretch along the river behind Riverside Park that's decent in the cold if you have the right coat." E. She had the right coat. They met at the park entrance at 6, in the dark, under the orange cast of the streetlights, and walked for 90 minutes along the river path while December did its best to make them miserable, and they declined to be. Victoria had a wool hat pulled low and her hands in her coat pockets, and she walked at a pace that matched his without requiring negotiation, which Ethan found quietly satisfying in a way he couldn't fully articulate. She had had a bad day. She didn't announce it. It came out in the texture of the first 20 minutes. She was more brittle than at the cafe, her sentences a little shorter, her pauses a little more loaded. He didn't push. He walked and let the river do some of the work, the way moving water did in the cold when you let it. Around the 15-minute mark, she said, "I lost a deal today that I've been building for 8 months." "What happened?" "The other party had a better offer. Cleaner terms, larger up front. I can't match it, and I wouldn't if I could because matching it would require conditions I'm not willing to accept." She kicked a small stone off the path. "It's the right outcome. Intellectually, I know that. The other deal would have compromised things I've worked for years to protect in how we operate. But it still feels like losing." "It still feels like losing," she confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. "Do you ever make the right decision and feel completely terrible about it anyway?" "Constantly," he said. She glanced at him. "I make the right call for Lily all the time," he said, "and it doesn't feel good. Last month I told her she couldn't go to a birthday party because she'd been sick and wasn't fully recovered and the other parent's house wasn't. The situation wasn't great. She cried for 40 minutes. I knew it was right. I felt awful. How do you manage that? The gap between knowing and feeling?" "I don't close it," he said. "I just try not to let the feeling override the knowing." He paused. "It doesn't always work." Victoria seemed to turn this over for a while. They walked past the old footbridge, the one with the rusted railings that the city kept promising to repair, and their breath came in small visible puffs in the cold air. "My CFO thinks I should have taken the deal," she said. "He's not wrong from a numbers standpoint. He'll be professional about it, but I'll feel the disagreement in every conversation we have for the next 3 months." She turned the collar of her coat up. "Managing people is sometimes the loneliest part of the job. Everyone has a position and a stake, and you're the only one in the room who has to hold the whole picture and make the call. Everyone else will second guess." "Sounds like parenting," Ethan said. Victoria blinked. Then she made a short, involuntary sound, surprised, a little helpless. That was the fullest laugh he'd heard from her yet. "That's exactly what it sounds like," she said. "That is the most accurate description of running a company that anyone has ever given me. Except in parenting, when you get it wrong, the stakes are very different." "Higher?" He considered it. "Different. Getting a business deal wrong costs money and time and reputation, which are serious things. Getting your kid wrong costs them. Their sense of what's safe and real." He paused. "I think about it a lot. Whether I'm getting the balance right, between protecting her and letting her be her own person." "What's the thing you're most afraid of getting wrong?" He thought about it honestly instead of reaching for the easy answer. "The anger," he said, finally. "I'm not an angry person, but I have a temper, not violent. I want to be clear about that. But I get short sometimes when I'm tired or under pressure, and I've had moments where my voice went sharp with her, and I could see on her face that she registered it as more than she should have. Those moments stay with me." "What do you do?" "I go back. I apologize specifically. Not sorry I got upset, but I got sharp with you, and that wasn't right. You didn't do anything that deserved that. And then I try to understand what tipped me." He looked at the river. "I'm not always successful." Victoria was quiet for a long time. I don't think I've ever heard a parent say that, she said, with that level of specificity. Most people either perform perfect guilt or perform no guilt at all. Performing anything at a 7-year-old is pointless. They see through everything. I know. I learned that about 30 minutes into knowing your daughter. Ethan stopped walking. He turned to her. In the orange street light, his face was probably readable. The surprise was genuine. You haven't met Lily, he said. Victoria seemed to hear what she'd said a half second after he did. Her expression shifted into something that was equal parts caught and deliberate. I know, she said. I said your daughter, but I should have said kids generally. Margaret's mentioned you and Lily together enough times that She stopped. I'm fumbling this. What I meant is, from what you've described of her, she sounds like the kind of child who would see through performance immediately. Ethan looked at her for a moment. You've been hearing about us for a while, he said. Not an accusation, an observation. Victoria met his eyes. Margaret has been talking about you, present tense, in real time, since before she called you about the dresser. The river moved alongside them, black and cold. Somewhere further up the path, a dog was barking at something in the dark. How long? He asked. 8 months, she said, which was exactly what Margaret had told him. The 8 months she'd been thinking about how to say what she said. She didn't push it. She never suggested I call you or look you up. She just... Victoria looked out at the water. Talked about you the way you talk about someone you believe in, and I found myself listening more carefully than I told myself I was. Ethan turned this over. He thought about those 4 days he'd spent not looking at the card, about the 47 minutes between sending the email and the buzz of her reply, about all the things that had been moving toward this riverbank before either of them knew they were moving. Did you look me up? He asked. Yes. And? LinkedIn has 2 things about your business and a headshot that's 3 years old, the corner of her mouth. And then I looked for anything else and found nothing, which told me more than the LinkedIn did. What did it tell you? That you're someone who's not performing for an audience. She looked at him. It's rare. I live in a world where everyone is performing all the time because that's how it functions. The visibility and the personal brand and the carefully curated... She shook her head. I'm so tired of it. I didn't know how tired I was until I sat across from you in a cafe and you told me you drove a dented truck without making it a self-deprecating joke, without making it a statement, like it was just a thing that was true. Because that's all it is. I know, she said quietly. That's why it landed. They stood there for a moment on the river path in the cold, with the city behind them and the black water beside them. The dog was still barking somewhere. The wind came off the water in slow intervals. Ethan knew something was shifting. He'd known it at the cafe, in a smaller way, and he knew it now more precisely. The feeling of standing at the edge of something that was real, that carried weight, that would not be manageable to feel casually if it kept developing. He was not a man who scared easily, but he was a careful man in the ways that mattered, and he felt the carefulness activate now like a familiar internal instrument. I have a daughter, he said. Not as a warning, as a fact that he needed to put plainly on the table because it was the central fact of everything. She's 7. She's not a complication I work around. She's my life. And anyone who becomes part of my life in any real way becomes part of hers, which means it's not casual. It can't be. I know, Victoria said. I'm not trying to... Ethan, her voice was quiet and direct. I know. I heard you the first time and I understand what you're saying. She turned to face him fully. I'm not asking to be casual. I don't know how to do casual anymore. I think I stopped knowing around age 25 when I realized that investing anything halfway was a strategy for wasting everything. I don't know what this is. She gestured between them, a small, unselfconscious movement. But I'd like to find out with both eyes open and no pretending it's smaller than it might be. Ethan held this. Okay, he said after a moment. That's it? Okay. What else do you need? She opened her mouth, then closed it. She seemed briefly at a loss, which he suspected was not a state she occupied often. Fair enough, she said. They turned and walked back toward the park entrance, against the wind this time, their shoulders occasionally close in the narrower sections of the path. They didn't resolve anything further. They didn't need to. The conversation had done what honest conversations did. Not tied things up, but cleared the ground, moved the air, made the space between two people a little less occupied by pretense and a little more available for what was actually there. When they reached the parking lot, they stood by their respective cars. Her rented black Audi, his dented F150, which sat under a light and was, he noted, even more visibly dented than he usually registered. "I'm in Boston next week," she said, "and London the week after. I've got a big kitchen install in Simsbury starting Monday. 3 weeks, probably." "We're both very busy," she said, with a dry tone that made it clear she recognized the absurdity of two people who had just had one of the more honest conversations of their recent lives, now retreating into scheduling logistics. "We are," he agreed. But we'll figure it out," she finished. "Yeah." She looked at him for a moment, that same assessing, direct look, the one he was starting to know. And then she got in the Audi without ceremony, and he got in the truck, and they pulled out of the parking lot in opposite directions. Ethan drove home in the dark with the heat on and the radio off. He picked Lily up from his neighbor Carol's house. She watched Lily on evenings when his schedule ran late, a reciprocal arrangement they'd developed over 2 years that worked well for everyone. Lily was half asleep on Carol's couch under a blanket, clutching a stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2. He carried her to the truck, which she tolerated with the boneless cooperation of the nearly asleep, and buckled her in. She surfaced briefly on the 3-minute drive home. "How was the walk?" she murmured. He glanced at her, eyes still mostly closed, the rabbit in her lap. "How do you know I went for a walk?" "Carol said you texted." "Right." He turned onto their street. "It was good." "Was it the weird conversation person?" "Yeah." A pause. She turned her head slightly toward the window. "Is she nice?" He thought about the laugh on the river path, the way she'd said "I know," the real kind, the crooked smile outside the cafe. "Yeah," he said. "She is." Lily seemed to absorb this from somewhere below full consciousness, filed it wherever 7-year-olds filed the things that mattered, and went back to sleep. Ethan pulled into the driveway, cut the engine, and sat for a moment in the quiet of the truck with his sleeping daughter beside him, and the night outside the glass, and the strange, slightly unsteady feeling of a life that was, without announcement, beginning to change. He sat with it, all of it. Then he got out and went around and unbuckled Lily and carried her inside. The Simsbury kitchen install ran 22 days instead of 3 weeks, which Ethan considered a minor victory. The house belonged to a couple in their 60s who had recently retired and decided to redo every room simultaneously, which was either brave or delusional depending on your perspective, and the kitchen was the largest of 4 concurrent projects being managed by different contractors who had collectively decided that coordination was someone else's problem. Ethan spent the first 4 days untangling a plumbing rough-in that the previous crew had placed 8 inches from where the plan specified, which required a conversation with the general contractor that was civil on the surface and hostile underneath, and then spent the remaining 18 days doing the actual work. He was good at the actual work. That part he didn't doubt. The communication with Victoria during those 3 weeks was not what either of them had planned, which was probably accurate for both their lives. She was in London for 10 days, then Boston, then back in San Francisco where her main office was, and the time zone gap between Connecticut and California meant that their exchanges happened mostly in the margins of their days. Her late evenings, his early mornings, the small windows that opened between the things that demanded their full attention. It was, he thought, a strange way to get to know someone, but it turned out to be revealing in ways that a more scheduled courtship might not have been. What people said when they were tired told you things. What they chose to mention in a 10-minute window between obligations told you what was actually on their mind. She told him at 11:30 on a Tuesday night from what was apparently her home office in San Francisco that she had found a mistake in a quarterly report that her finance team had not caught, and that she had spent the preceding 3 hours deciding whether to address it publicly or handle it internally, and that she had chosen publicly because the alternative was a kind of institutional dishonesty she wasn't willing to normalize, and that she was now dreading the morning calls. He told her, at 6 in the morning from his truck outside the Simsbury house, that Lily had informed him the previous evening that she wanted to be a marine biologist and also a pastry chef, and that she saw no contradiction in this, and that he had spent a solid 20 minutes looking up whether there was any professional overlap between the two fields before accepting that his daughter was 7 and the question was not yet urgent. Victoria had written back within 4 minutes. She's right that there's no contradiction. Tell her the ocean has excellent pastry potential, and she should keep both options open. He'd read it sitting in his truck in the early dark and felt something in his chest that he didn't try to name. The calls were less frequent than the messages, but better. The first real phone call, as opposed to the brief logistical ones about scheduling, happened on a Wednesday night when Lily was at a sleepover at her friend Becca's house and Ethan was eating leftover pasta at his kitchen table in the specific quiet that the house got when Lily wasn't in it, which was a different kind of quiet from the regular nighttime quiet, heavier somehow, more aware of itself. Victoria called at 8:47. He answered on the second ring. "Are you busy?" she asked. "Eating pasta. Not busy." "Good." A pause. He could hear something in the background, so not music, more like the ambient sound of a large, well-furnished space. "I had a strange day, and I wanted to talk to someone." "What happened?" "An interview, a journalist from a tech publication I generally respect. She asked me, about 20 minutes in, whether I thought women in tech were held to different standards than their male counterparts." She paused. "Obviously the answer is yes. Obviously I've experienced it directly. But the way she asked it, the framing, the expectation of a particular answer, the sense that she'd already written the quote before I gave it, it made me want to say something complicated instead of something useful, which is a terrible instinct when you're in a recorded interview." "What did you say?" "I said yes, and I gave 3 concrete examples from my own career, and I kept it factual, because the moment I got emotional about it, the story becomes about my emotions rather than the documented reality." Her voice had the tension of someone who had made the professionally correct call and was still chafing against it. And then she asked me whether I thought my success was, quote, despite those barriers. And I wanted to say that framing implies I succeeded by enduring rather than by building, which are 2 completely different things, but I said something diplomatic. "Do you regret saying the diplomatic thing?" "I regret that the diplomatic thing was necessary." A pause. "Does that distinction make sense?" "Yeah," he said. "It does." "Your voice does a thing when you actually agree versus when you're being agreeable," she said. "I've started noticing." "What thing?" "It gets a little shorter. Like the word is just the word and it doesn't need anything attached to it." He sat with this. The pasta was getting cold. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "Good," she said. "I spend most of my professional life in rooms where nothing is ever just the thing. Everything has a frame and an angle and a positioning. It's exhausting." He could hear her shifting, sitting back maybe or moving to a different room. "Tell me about your day, the real version." So he told her. The plumbing argument, which had escalated in the afternoon because the GC had tried to claim the discrepancy was in Ethan's original measurements, which it wasn't. And Ethan had produced the plans and the photographs from day one and laid them on the workbench without raising his voice, because in his experience, the quieter you got when you were right, the louder it landed. The GC had backed down. It wasn't satisfying exactly, mostly just draining, the way conflicts were even when you won them. "The quiet approach," Victoria said. "I use that. It took me years to learn it. I learned it from my mother. She's the most stubborn person I've ever met, and she almost never raises her voice. I think the 2 things are connected." "How's she doing? You mentioned her health earlier." He hadn't expected her to remember that. The offhand mention from the cafe, the early stage, treatable thing he'd mentioned in a sentence while describing why he hadn't moved with Sophia. That she'd filed it and kept it and asked about it now felt like a small, specific thing that landed with more weight than it should have. "Better," he said. "The last scan was clean. She's doing a treatment that makes her tired, but He paused. "She's stubborn, like I said. She's annoyed by the whole situation more than she's scared, which my sister says is a good sign. You have a sister? Claire. She's 28, lives in Westport, works in architecture. She and Lily have a very codependent relationship built entirely on shared enthusiasm for craft projects and animated movies. That sounds like a genuinely functional dynamic. It is. Claire has been, he searched for the right word, a net positive in ways I couldn't have predicted. When Lily was small and I was figuring out the practical parts, the daycare, the pediatric appointments, the sheer administrative weight of a child, Claire just showed up. Didn't ask what I needed, just showed up with food or a schedule, or sometimes just herself. People who show up without asking are rare. Yeah. He moved the pasta closer, ate a forkful cold. She thinks you're interesting, by the way. A beat. You told your sister about me. She asked why I was texting more than usual. I gave a partial explanation. She did the rest herself. He paused. Claire is efficient at conclusions. What did she conclude? That anyone Margaret Grant would personally vouch for was worth paying attention to. And then she Googled you and sent me 3 articles and said, and I'm quoting directly, Ethan, what is happening? Victoria laughed. It was the good laugh, the one he'd been learning to distinguish from the social one. The good laugh was less controlled, slightly uneven, like it caught her off guard. What did you tell her? I told her I didn't know yet, which she found unsatisfying. It's an honest answer. It is, he agreed. It's still the honest answer. A comfortable silence, the kind that didn't ask to be filled. He'd noticed that their silences were already different from the pauses in ordinary conversation. They had the texture of 2 people who were okay being in the same space without performing. Can I ask you something? Victoria said, that I've been thinking about but haven't asked because I wasn't sure it was fair. Go ahead. What's your actual reaction, not the polite version, to the gap? The money, the profile, the fact that I own a plane, which I recognize sounds absurd to say out loud. He considered it carefully. He wasn't going to perform indifference, and he wasn't going to perform ease. Honestly, it doesn't bother me the way people probably assume it would. I'm not threatened by your success. I'm not sitting here feeling like I need to match it or compete with it. He turned his coffee mug in his hands. What I think about more is the practical reality. You live a life that requires, he searched, a lot of infrastructure, teams of people, multiple cities, a level of visibility that doesn't turn off. My life is built around one school schedule and a job that depends on being present and local. I think about whether those 2 things can coexist without one of them fundamentally compromising the other. That's the most structural answer anyone has ever given me to that question. What do most people say? It doesn't matter to me, she said with a flatness that indicated how little she believed it when people said it. Or some version of I admire what you've built, which is a compliment and an exit from the actual conversation rolled into one. She paused. You said coexist without compromising. Do you think they can? I think they can if both people are honest about what they actually need and willing to build something that's genuinely theirs instead of trying to fit into each other's existing life. He paused. That's a larger thing than 3 weeks and some phone calls. It is. But it's not a reason to stop. No, she said quietly. It's not. They talked until 11:15 when Victoria's phone died and she texted him from her laptop to say goodnight with the dry acknowledgement that charging her devices regularly was apparently beyond her, which he found humanizing in a way he didn't say out loud. He sat at the kitchen table for a while after, in the quiet house, and thought about structural things, about what coexist without compromising actually looked like in practice, about a plane he'd never be on, and a school concert he'd never miss, and the question of whether 2 very different lives could build something genuine in the space between them. He didn't arrive at answers. He cleaned up the kitchen, turned out the lights, and went to bed, which was the most practical response to most things. The Simsbury kitchen wrapped on a Friday afternoon, final walkthrough with the homeowners, both of them pleased in the cautious way of people who had been living in construction for 3 weeks and needed a few days of normal before they could be enthusiastic. Ethan drove home with the truck loaded and an ache across his upper back that had been his companion for the better part of the project, and found Lily in the living room building something elaborate with wooden blocks that she declined to explain. "What is it?" he asked, dropping his keys. "It's not done yet," she said without looking up. "What will it be when it's done?" "A city." She placed a block with surgical precision. "But not a real city, a better one." "Better how?" She considered this with genuine seriousness. "More parks, less parking. The library's in the middle." She pointed at a tall block formation at the center of her layout. "Libraries should be in the middle because everyone needs them." He stood in the doorway and looked at his daughter and felt the particular feeling that parented him as much as he parented her. A feeling without a clean name, something between love and awe, and a specific kind of fear that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with the enormous responsibility of not messing up something this important. "Victoria's going to be in Hartford next week," he said. "Wednesday." Lily looked up for the first time. The weird conversation person. "I wish you'd stop calling her that." "That's what she was at first," Lily said with the unassailable logic of a child who saw no reason to revise accurate terminology. "Is she not weird anymore?" "She was never weird. The situation was—" He gave up on the distinction. "She's someone I've been getting to know. I want you two to meet." Lily's expression shifted into the careful, slightly guarded look that she deployed when she was processing something that mattered to her. He knew that look. He had learned it the way you learn to read weather. Not because you were a meteorologist, but because your life depended on accurate forecasting. "Does she know about me?" Lily asked. "She knows a lot about you. I've told her about you." "What did you say?" "I told her about the lamp dress, and the fractions, and the city you're building right now, basically." Lily looked back at her blocks. She picked one up, turned it over, put it in a different place. "Does she like kids?" "I think she does. But I think she's not sure yet, in the way adults aren't sure about things they haven't had a lot of experience with." This seemed to satisfy Lily more than a more confident answer would have. She was good at spotting overclaims. "Will she come here?" she asked. "I thought we could get dinner somewhere. Neutral ground." He paused, then added, because he knew she'd think it anyway. "You don't have to like her. I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking you to meet her." Lily placed another block. "I know, Dad." He looked at her. "I'm 7, she said. "Not a baby." But she said it without real sharpness, just the matter-of-fact precision of someone establishing the record. He told Victoria over the phone on Sunday evening, with the directness that had become the standard register between them, the one they defaulted to so early that neither of them remembered choosing it. "I want you to meet Lily," he said. "Wednesday, if you're free. Dinner somewhere low-key." A pause that was not very long but was present. "Okay," she said. "That's it? Okay?" "You used my word," she said. "No, Another pause, this one more honest in its texture. "I want to be transparent about the fact that I'm slightly terrified." Of a 7-year-old. Of a 7-year-old who, by your own description, sees through everything and has already formed strong opinions about the lamp-shaped dress situation. He heard her exhale. "I'm good in boardrooms. I'm good in hostile negotiations. I once talked a room of 40 investors out of a decision I believed was wrong, and I was the youngest person there by 12 years. But small children have historically found me." She searched. "Unrelaxing to be around." "Unrelaxing. I don't know how to perform with them. Adults you can perform for, even a little, and it works. Children see straight through to whatever is actually happening, and then they either decide you're okay or they don't. And there's nothing you can do to manage the outcome." "That's exactly right," Ethan said. "So don't manage it. Just be yourself." That advice is less helpful than people think it is when you're not sure yourself is a known quantity in this context. He almost said something reassuring. He stopped himself because she'd see through reassurance the way Lily would, and what she actually needed was honesty. "You'll be fine," he said, "in the sense that no matter what happens on Wednesday, nothing will break. It's dinner. If it goes badly, it goes badly. And we learn something, and we figure out the next thing from there." Another exhale. "Right. But for what it's worth, she already knows you exist. I told her today, And her first question was whether you knew about her. What did you tell her? The truth. That I've told you a lot about her. A beat. Then, softer. You have. She asked if you liked kids, and I told her I thought you did, but weren't sure yet because you hadn't had a lot of experience, and she seemed to accept that more than she would have accepted, yes, definitely. She fact-checks, Victoria said. There was something in her voice that he identified after a moment as the beginning of affection, not for the concept of Lily, for the specific, particular reality of her. That makes complete sense. Yeah, he said. It does. They agreed on a restaurant, a place called Hearth and Timber on the edge of downtown Hartford, casual enough that Lily wouldn't feel like she was supposed to behave differently than usual, good enough that it wasn't an afterthought. Ethan made the reservation for 6:30, which was late for Lily on a school night, but manageable, and spent the intervening days in the particular suspended state of someone who has put two important things into a room and has to wait to see what happens. The night before, Lily asked him, while he was reading to her, whether Victoria was his girlfriend. He put the book down. We're getting to know each other, he said carefully. Lily looked at the ceiling. That's not an answer. It's the honest answer. We're still figuring out what it is. She seemed to consider this with more patience than he expected. Is it like when I liked Marcus in first grade, but I didn't know if he liked me back, so I just kept sitting near him at lunch to see what happened? Ethan blinked. Kind of. Yeah, a little like that. And then he shared his crackers with me, and I knew. Did it work out with Marcus? He moved to Rhode Island in February. She pulled the blanket up. But it was good while it lasted. He stared at his daughter for a moment. Read the chapter, Dad. He read the chapter. Wednesday arrived the way important evenings always did, faster than he was ready for, and with the specific texture of a thing that could not be postponed or rehearsed. He picked Lily up from school, came home, let her change out of her school clothes while he showered and put on the same dark jeans and a different Henley. This one navy, which Claire had once told him was his best color, a piece of information he had stored and never publicly acknowledged. Lily came out of her room in a purple sweater and corduroys, her hair in a slightly uneven ponytail that she had done herself and was clearly proud of. He did not offer to fix it. How do I look? She asked. Good. How do I look? She studied him with professional detachment. Better than work days, she concluded. Not too much better. That's probably right. He had nothing to add to that. They arrived at Hearth and Timber at 6:25. Victoria was already there, standing near the host stand in a dark green sweater and dark pants, her coat over her arm, looking at something on her phone with the focused expression she got when she was reading something she didn't want to be reading. She looked up when they walked in, and the phone went into her coat pocket in a single clean motion. She looked, Ethan thought, nervous. Not in a way most people would have seen. She was composed. Her posture was straight. Her expression settled quickly into something warm and present. But he had been paying attention to her long enough to read the difference between her composed and her relaxed. And this was composed. He appreciated it. The nervousness meant she understood this mattered. Hi, she said. Hi. He stepped aside slightly. Victoria, this is Lily. Lily was doing her assessment thing, the quiet, patient, systematic evaluation she ran on new people, which she did without apparent self-consciousness, and which most adults found either charming or slightly unnerving depending on their own self-awareness. Victoria crouched down. Not the exaggerated crouch adults sometimes did with small children, the one that said, I am now performing warmth at your eye level. A real crouch. She looked at Lily with the same directness she applied to everything. I've heard about the lamp dress, she said. Lily blinked. Then, he told you about that? He told me about a lot of things. Victoria's voice was level, no performance in it. He said you have strong opinions about fractions. Fractions are useful but terrible, Lily said, with the authority of someone who had resolved this philosophically. That's accurate, Victoria said. They don't get better, by the way. You just get more used to them. Lily appeared to file this information. Are you nervous? She asked, with the guileless directness that Ethan had learned meant she already knew the answer and was testing for honesty. Victoria held eye contact. A little bit. Why? Because your opinion matters to your dad, which means it matters to me, and I can't control what your opinion is, which I find difficult. A pause. Lily looked at her with the expression Ethan recognized as the one where she was deciding something. My dad says you own a plane, Lily said. I do. Have you ever been scared on the plane? Once. There was bad turbulence over the Atlantic, and we dropped about 400 feet very suddenly, and I spilled coffee on my laptop. What happened to the laptop? It died. Lily appeared to consider whether this was a tragedy or a natural consequence. Did you cry? No, but I was very annoyed, which for me is basically the same thing. Something shifted in Lily's expression. Not a full smile, she didn't hand those out easily, but a slight opening, like a door that had been almost closed, moving a degree toward almost open. Okay, she said, and turned toward the dining room as though the matter was settled, leaving both adults standing at the host stand looking at each other. Victoria straightened up. Ethan could see in her face the remnant of the nervousness dissolving into something that was partly relief and partly genuine surprise. Was that? She started quietly. That's good, he said. That's very good. They followed Lily to the table. Dinner was not smooth. Ethan hadn't expected smooth and was glad it wasn't. Lily went through a period in the middle, around the soup course, where she became visibly tired and slightly withdrawn in the way she got when she'd been in social mode for too long, and she ate in near silence for about 10 minutes while Victoria and Ethan filled the gap with conversation that had the particular quality of adults trying to occupy space without making the child feel the effort of it. It was not seamless. There was a moment when Lily spilled water and seemed briefly mortified, and a moment when she announced with no transitional context that she had decided the restaurant smelled like a library, which Ethan could not have argued with if he'd tried. But there was also the moment, somewhere between the main course and the dessert menu, when Lily turned to Victoria and said, with great seriousness, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Victoria said. "Do you know anything about ocean animals?" A pause. "Some things. Mostly what I've read. Why?" "I want to be a marine biologist," Lily said. "My dad says it's a good idea, and I can also do pastry, but I want to know if you think it's a real job." Victoria put her fork down and gave the question the genuine consideration it deserved. "It's absolutely a real job. It's also a hard field to break into because the funding is competitive, and a lot of the most interesting work requires living in places that aren't always convenient." She looked at Lily directly. "But the people I've met who do it, the ones who are in it because they actually love it, seem like some of the most satisfied people I know." "What's competitive funding?" Lily asked. "It means a lot of people want the money to do the research and not everyone gets it. Like how everyone wants the good swing at recess, but there's only 2 good swings." "Exactly like that," Victoria said, "except the money is the swing." Lily seemed satisfied with this. She turned back to her food. Then, without looking up, "The pastry part is also real. My dad and I make croissants sometimes." "Are they good?" "They're okay," Lily said with the honesty of someone who maintained standards. "We're still learning." Victoria glanced at Ethan. He lifted one shoulder in a small acknowledgement of the croissant situation, which was accurate. They'd attempted croissants twice, and the results had been edible but architecturally unimpressive. "Fair assessment," he said. When they left the restaurant, Lily held Ethan's hand in the parking lot with the automatic ease of a child who didn't think about it, and as they walked to the truck, she looked back once at Victoria, who was walking a half step behind. "You can come next time," Lily said, with the finality of a verdict. Then she climbed into the truck and didn't look back again, as though the offer was already in the past and she'd moved on to other things. Victoria stood in the cold parking lot looking at the truck with an expression that Ethan caught in the moment before she composed it. Something that was surprised and unguarded and slightly overwhelmed in the way that real things made people overwhelmed when they arrived without warning. He stopped beside her. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She looked at him. The parking lot lights were orange, same as the ones on the river path, and her face was the same mix of composed and real that he'd been learning to read since December. "That child," she said. is extraordinary. I know. I wasn't prepared for that. Nobody ever is. He paused. Lily is exactly what she is at all times. There's no version of being prepared for that. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I haven't been told I could come next time by a person whose opinion I cared about in... She stopped. I don't think anyone has said that to me in a very long time. He didn't say anything to that. He just stood there in the cold with her, in the parking lot outside a restaurant that smelled like a library, with his daughter waiting in the truck and the night settling in around them, and let the moment be exactly what it was without trying to make it smaller or larger than the truth of it. Next time, he said, finally. Next time, she agreed. She got in the Audi. He got in the truck. Lily was already half asleep in the back seat, her ponytail listing sideways, the purple sweater wrinkled from the evening. Ethan pulled out of the parking lot and drove home through the Hartford streets, the city lights moving across the windshield in slow orange intervals, and thought about next time. About all the specific ordinary weight that phrase contained when you said it and meant it. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Lily, eyes closed, breathing slow. She had offered an invitation to a billionaire the way she'd offer one to anyone she'd decided was worth another look, plainly, without drama, and then moved on before the other person could make a big deal of it. He supposed, he thought, that was exactly the right way to do it. Next time turned out to be 3 weeks later, which felt both too long and exactly right, the way most things between them did when the logistics of their lives imposed their honest terms on the situation. Victoria came back to Hartford on a Thursday in late January with 2 days cleared on her calendar, a deliberate clearing, not incidental, which Ethan understood represented something because he had come to understand that Victoria's calendar was a document she defended with the same precision she applied to contracts. She'd mentioned it plainly in an email without making a production of it. I blocked Thursday and Friday, no meetings, let me know what works. He'd read that and sat with it for a moment. The word blocked did something. It meant she'd looked at her week and actively removed things to make room, which was different from finding a gap. He wrote back, Thursday works. Lily has a half day. She wants to show you the city she's building. The city in the living room had evolved significantly in the 3 weeks since the restaurant. It now occupied most of the living room floor on a sheet of plywood Ethan had cut to size at Lily's specifications, and it had acquired a harbor district, 3 distinct neighborhoods differentiated by block height, and a train system that was currently theoretical, but that Lily had mapped on a piece of graph paper with a colored pencil. The library remained in the center. She had been firm about that. Victoria arrived at the house at 1:30 on Thursday, 45 minutes after Ethan picked Lily up from school. She knocked instead of ringing the bell, which Lily informed Ethan was a polite choice because doorbells were startling, and Lily answered the door herself because she had positioned herself near it for the preceding 10 minutes, in a way she believed was casual and that Ethan found completely transparent. "Hi," Lily said. "Hi." Victoria was wearing jeans and a coat he hadn't seen before, caramel-colored wool, and she looked less put together than at the restaurant, which he suspected was intentional. She had a small canvas bag over one shoulder. "I brought something. I wasn't sure if it was appropriate to bring something." "What is it?" Lily asked. "Books about ocean animals?" She pulled 3 out of the bag. They were good books. Not the picture book kind, but the kind with real photographs and biological diagrams, the kind that treated their subjects seriously. I asked someone at a bookstore in San Francisco. The woman there was very knowledgeable. Lily took them with both hands and looked at the covers with an expression of controlled enthusiasm, which was the only kind she typically displayed in front of new people. "You went to a real bookstore?" she asked. "I did." "Not online." "The bookstore person knows things the algorithm doesn't," Victoria said, which was apparently the right answer because Lily's expression unlocked another degree. "Come see the city," she said, and led Victoria into the living room without waiting. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched Victoria sit cross-legged on the living room floor next to a 7-year-old and receive a full architectural briefing on a fictional municipality. He watched Victoria ask questions, real ones, the kind that required actual attention to the material, not the performance of adult interest. She asked why the train ran east-west instead of north-south, She asked what the tall structure in the northeast corner was. She pointed at the harbor district and said, "This neighborhood feels different from the others." "Was that intentional?" Lily stared at her. "You can tell?" "The block spacing is different, more irregular, like it grew up over time instead of being planned." "Because it did," Lily said. "That's the old part. People built there first and then the city grew around it." "That's how most real cities work," Victoria said. "The irregular parts are usually the most interesting." Lily sat back on her heels and looked at Victoria with the expression she used when she was revising a previous assessment upward. Ethan recognized it because she'd given it to him once, around age 5, when he'd correctly identified which cloud looked most like a dog. "You know about cities," Lily said. "I've lived in a few, and I've built things, which teaches you to pay attention to how other things are built." "What did you build?" "Software, mostly, which is like a city in some ways. You have to think about how the pieces connect, and what happens when one part breaks, and who it affects." Lily considered this metaphor with the seriousness it deserved. "Does your city have a library?" "It has documentation," Victoria said, "which is the software version." "Is that the same?" "Ideally." Ethan went to make coffee and left them to it. He stood in the kitchen listening to the murmur of his daughter explaining the theoretical train system while water boiled, and felt something he couldn't immediately categorize. Not happiness exactly, though happiness was present. Something more structural, like a load-bearing element that had been missing from a frame and had been found and put in place, and now the frame stood differently, more squarely, in a way that changed the quality of everything around it. He poured the coffee and stood at the kitchen counter for an extra moment, not interrupting. They ate lunch at the kitchen table, sandwiches that Lily helped assemble with the supervisory intensity she brought to any collaborative task. And the conversation moved through subjects with the unpredictable logic of meals that involved a child. Ocean acidification, the ethics of keeping fish in aquariums, whether robots would take most jobs by the time Lily grew up, and the specific and non-negotiable question of what the best flavor of ice cream was. "Mint chocolate chip," Lily said. "Coffee," Victoria said. Lily looked at her with something approaching pity. "That's an adult flavor." "Yes. Adults pick flavors that aren't fun." "We do," Victoria agreed with complete equanimity. "It's one of the costs of getting older." Lily found this acceptably honest and returned to her sandwich. Ethan watched them across the table and said very little. He was not a man who needed to fill every conversation, and right now what was happening in front of him was better than anything he could have added to it. After lunch, Lily took her books to her room to read, which was her standard retreat from the social portion of the afternoon, and the house shifted into the quieter frequency that it got when she was nearby, but absorbed in something else. Victoria helped clear the table without being asked. She moved in his kitchen with the slight unfamiliarity of someone learning a new physical space, opening the wrong cabinet once before finding the right one, and she didn't apologize for it, just corrected course and kept moving, which he liked. "She's even more than you described," Victoria said. "Most people who meet her say that. Does she know how unusual she is?" "I try not to make a production of it. She needs to be a kid more than she needs to know she's exceptional." He rinsed a plate. "My mother says I was similar at her age, which I only partly believe." Victoria leaned against the counter with her coffee. "Your mother sounds like someone I'd want to meet." He looked at her. "She wants to meet you." "You told her about me." "Claire told her about you. I confirmed the relevant parts." He paused. "My mother is... she's perceptive in ways that aren't always comfortable. She'll have opinions." "Will she say them out loud?" "Directly to your face, in full sentences, while maintaining eye contact." Victoria almost smiled. "I respect that deeply. You say that now." "I've had investors tell me directly to my face in full sentences while maintaining eye contact that my company was going to fail," she said. "A perceptive mother seems manageable." "The investors were wrong," he said. "My mother is usually right, which makes it different." She looked at him with the look he knew now, the assessing one that wasn't unfriendly, just honest in its appraisal. "Are you warning me or preparing me?" "Both." He turned off the faucet. "She'll love you eventually. The path to eventually is just direct." "Eventually," she repeated, not with anxiety, just logging it as the accurate word. They took their coffee to the living room, careful to step around the edges of Lily's city, and sat on the couch with the afternoon light coming through the windows in the flat white way. February light came through Connecticut windows. No warmth in it yet, just brightness. The house was quiet with Lily's quiet. Outside, someone on the street was walking a dog that had opinions about something. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said, "that I've been putting off because I wasn't sure how to say it, and because I'm aware it has the potential to be destabilizing, and I've been trying to figure out whether my hesitation is about protecting the situation or just about fear." Ethan set down his coffee. "Okay. A profile is coming out, long form, national publication, the kind that takes 8 months to report and then lands in front of about 4 million readers. They've been following me since last spring." She looked at her coffee mug. "The journalist is thorough, and I believe she's fair, but the piece will be comprehensive. It will include things about my personal life, not private details, nothing I haven't confirmed, but the fact that I'm seeing someone will be in it." He held this. "Did you confirm that?" he asked carefully. "I didn't volunteer it. She found it. Someone in my social circle mentioned something they shouldn't have, which happens in this world regardless of what precautions you take." Victoria's voice was even, but there was tension underneath it, the kind you heard when someone was being disciplined about something that was actually bothering them. "I confirmed only that I was seeing someone and that I wasn't going to discuss the details. She respected that and won't push, but—" She paused. "The fact of it will be in the piece, which means eventually someone will connect it to you. And when that happens, your name will be in places that you've never been, and your life will become briefly visible in ways that I don't think you want." He was quiet for a moment. The dog outside was still having its opinions. The February light was still flat and white. "How brief is briefly?" he asked. "The initial wave, a week, maybe 10 days of active interest. Then it recedes unless something else feeds it. The danger is the secondary coverage, the blogs and the aggregators that build stories off the profile. Some of them will find you specifically and reach out. Some won't bother reaching out and will just publish what they find." She looked at him directly. "I've been through this version of exposure twice before. I know what it looks like. I wanted you to know what you're walking toward before it gets there." He looked at the city on the floor, the library in the middle, the old harbor district with its irregular spacing. "When does it publish?" he said. 6 weeks. "And your name will be connected to mine." "Potentially. Probably." Her jaw tightened slightly, the tell she had when something cost her to say. "I'm not going to tell you it won't affect your life, because it will. Temporarily, but the temporary part matters." "What about Lily?" "I've thought about that more than anything else." Her voice shifted down a register. "If they find you, they'll find her name through you. School records are public, social media, anything people who know you have posted. I can have my communications team proactively make it clear that children are completely off limits and that any publication that includes a minor's identifying details will face legal response. That's not a bluff. I have the resources to make that consequential, but I can't guarantee no one tests it." The room held the weight of that for a moment. Ethan looked at Victoria, at the careful, controlled way she was holding this conversation, the way she was giving him every uncomfortable piece of it instead of softening the edges, the way her hands were slightly too still in her lap, which was the thing she did when she was holding something she couldn't fully control and found the lack of control difficult. "You could have not told me until it happened," he said. "Yes." "You could have found a way to mention it that made it sound smaller." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" She looked at him with the directness that had been there from the first hour in the cafe and had not varied. "Because you've been honest with me about every hard thing. Because you told me about Lily before I could factor it in. Because you told me what you actually thought about the gap between our lives without softening it. Because every single time there was a thing that might have made this easier to say if you'd said it differently, you said it straight." She paused. "I am not going to be a different kind of person with you than the kind of person you've been with me." He sat with that for a long time. He thought about the cabinet work, the measuring twice, the level held against the wall, the specific patience of getting something precisely right because precision was the only thing that didn't eventually fail. He thought about the morning he'd brought Lily home at 14 months and sat on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning and decided to stay. He thought about the dresser in Margaret's hallway and the card on his passenger seat and the 47 minutes between sending an email and the buzz of a reply. "Okay," he said. "Okay. I'll talk to Lily's school. They have protocols for media contact. I'll make sure they're applied. I'll tell Claire and my mother before it comes out so they're not blindsided." He picked up his coffee. "And if someone calls me, I say no comment and call your communications team." Victoria blinked. "You're not—" She stopped. "What?" "Most people," she said carefully, "would need more time with that. The sitting with it kind of time." "I've had 6 weeks of time," he said. "You knew this was coming and you were figuring out how to tell me. I can do the math on when that started." He looked at her. "It means you've been carrying this while we were building something, and you still did the building, and you told me as soon as you'd worked out how. That's not a thing I need to sit with." Something happened in Victoria's face that she did not fully control. He had seen her composed face and her focused face and her real laugh face and the particular face she made when she was deciding how honest to be. He had not seen this one before. It was quieter than the others and more exposed, and she blinked once and looked at the city on the floor, and when she looked back at him, she had it mostly in hand but not entirely. "Thank you," she said. "Just that." "You don't have to thank me for—" "I know I don't have to," she said. "I want to." The profile published 5.5 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, and it was everything Victoria had said it would be. Thorough, fair, and comprehensive. Ethan read it at his kitchen table before Lily woke up with a cup of coffee and the specific stillness of a man reading something about someone he cared about that had been written by someone who didn't know her. The journalist had done her job well. The piece was built from facts and quotes and the testimony of people who had worked with Victoria for years, and it painted a portrait that was accurate in its architecture while being necessarily incomplete in its texture, the way all portraits of living people were. The personal section was 3 paragraphs. It described Victoria as recently entering a relationship for the first time in several years with a Connecticut-based professional whose identity she has declined to discuss publicly, citing a preference for privacy in her personal life. 3 sentences. No name. No detail beyond the state. He set down the coffee and exhaled. His phone rang 40 minutes later. Claire. "I'm reading it," she said before he could speak. "I know. Connecticut-based professional. I know." That is the most polite way anyone has ever described a cabinet installer in a national magazine. Despite everything, he laughed. Claire had a gift for finding the absurd angle on any situation and deploying it at the precise moment when you needed it. "Are you okay?" she asked, the absurdist performance dropping into something real. "Yeah, she told me it was coming." "I know, you told me. I mean, are you okay with it? With being adjacent to all that?" He thought about it genuinely. The truth was that the 3 paragraphs had been less than he'd braced for, and the secondary coverage over the following week, he'd been right to prepare for it, had been more. 3 blogs, a gossip aggregator, 1 tabloid-adjacent site that had found his LinkedIn and published a piece headlined, "Who is Victoria Sterling's Mystery Man?" With a 3-year-old headshot and a description of his company that was accurate, but that read strangely in the font they'd chosen for it. One person had emailed his business account. Marco had fielded 2 press calls with magnificent disinterest and then sent Ethan a text that said, "You owe me lunch," plural. It was uncomfortable. It was not unsurvivable. The school had been impeccable. The protocols had held, Lily's name had not appeared anywhere, and the one journalist who had called the school had been met with a response from the principal that apparently communicated, without explicit legal language, that this was the end of the inquiry. "I'm okay with it," he told Claire, and meant it in the way he meant most things. Not perfectly, but truly. "Good." A pause. "Mom wants to meet her." "I know." "She said to tell you she'll be on her best behavior." "That's terrifying." "Deeply," Claire agreed. "But she means well, and she loves you, and she's mostly afraid you'll end up with someone who doesn't deserve you, which historically has not been an unfounded concern." He had no argument for that. "I'll set something up." "Ethan." Claire's voice dropped the comedy entirely. I read the whole piece, the stuff about the company and what she built from nothing and how she handled the hard years. She's a pause. She's a real person. I know, he said quietly. I know you know. I'm just. Claire seemed to search for the right version of what she was trying to say. I just want you to know I see it, what's happening, and I'm glad. He sat in his quiet kitchen for a moment after they hung up, the coffee gone cold, the February morning pressing gray against the windows. He was glad too. He was also scared, which was not a thing he said out loud very often, but it was present. The specific fear that came not from anything going wrong, but from having something real that could go wrong, which was different from the low-level background fear of a life being managed cautiously. This was the fear of investment, of having put something real on the table and understanding for the first time in a long time what you stood to lose. He found he preferred it to the alternative. Lily came down at 7:15 in her pajamas, found him at the table, and looked at him with the particular attention she had for his face when she sensed something was happening. You're doing the weird face again, she said. Which one? The thinking one, not the measurement one. The not bad weird one, he said, which was the phrase they'd landed on months ago in the truck after the first meeting with Victoria. It had become a shorthand. Lily climbed up into the chair across from him, which she often did before being fully awake, as a kind of preliminary engagement with the day. She pulled her knees to her chest. Is it about Victoria? A little bit, yeah. She rested her chin on her knees. Do you like her? He looked at his daughter. The question was simple and exact in the way her questions always were, cutting straight to the center of a thing. Yeah, he said. I do. Lily appeared to process this. She was quiet for a moment, which was her processing mode, not her discomfort mode. He knew the difference. Does she like you? She asked. I think so. Does she like me? He looked at her. She bought you 3 books from a real bookstore and asked why your train runs east-west, he said. What do you think? Lily looked at the table. A small private expression crossed her face. Not the controlled, almost smile she'd given Victoria at the restaurant, but the real one, the one she saved for things she was genuinely pleased about, but wasn't ready to say out loud yet. Okay, she said, which was not a question this time. It was a position. He leaned back in his chair and looked at his daughter in her pajamas at the kitchen table, deciding things at 7:30 in the morning with the same calm authority she brought to architectural decisions about fictional cities. Okay, he agreed. His mother's name was Diane, and she had been a high school English teacher for 31 years before retiring, a fact that explained both her precision with language and her foundational assumption that most situations could be improved by more careful reading. She lived 45 minutes north in Torrington, in the same house where Ethan and Claire had grown up, and she had been managing her treatment schedule with the slightly aggrieved efficiency of someone who found illness administratively inconvenient rather than emotionally terrifying, which the oncologist said was actually a positive prognostic indicator, and which the family had chosen to accept at face value. Ethan drove up on a Saturday in early March, with Lily in the back seat and a container of soup he'd made from a recipe his mother had given him years ago, and that he made slightly differently now and had never told her, which was either an act of love or self-preservation depending on his mood. Victoria met them there. He'd offered to pick her up, but she'd said she'd rather drive herself. Easier if I need to make a graceful exit, and I might, which he'd accepted both for the honesty and because it gave her a sense of agency in a situation that was inherently one where she was being evaluated. He understood that. He'd have wanted the same. She pulled up 5 minutes after them, which was probably calculated. Enough time that she hadn't waited alone with his mother, but not so much that she seemed to be stalling. Diane Brooks met them at the door. She was 63, small and upright, with gray hair she'd never bothered to do anything with, and glasses she wore consistently, and reading glasses she wore on top of those when the situation demanded it. She had Ethan's quietness and Claire's directness, and a personal warmth level that existed entirely below the surface of her expression, which strangers sometimes misread as coldness. She looked at Victoria for a long moment. Victoria looked back. Diane said, Claire told me you argued a room of 40 investors down. Were you right? Yes, Victoria said. How do you know? The model they wanted to fund failed within 18 months. Mine didn't. Diane considered this. That's evidence, not certainty. It's the best available kind, Victoria said. Something in Diane's posture shifted by approximately 2 degrees toward approval. She opened the door wider. Come in, she said. The soup is already on the stove, Ethan. I knew you were bringing it. Mom, it's the same recipe, just slightly different aromatics. I noticed 2 years ago. She walked inside without looking back. Lily, come help me with the bread. Lily appeared at Diane's side with the allegiance of a child who had known her grandmother's kitchen her entire life and considered it a personal territory. They disappeared toward the back of the house. Ethan stood at the door with Victoria. She looked at him. She noticed the aromatics, Victoria said carefully. She was an English teacher. She notices everything. Is that? Victoria glanced toward the kitchen. She opened the door wider, he said. With my mother, that's the equivalent of a standing ovation. Victoria looked at him for a moment and then made the sound, the uneven, slightly helpless one, that he had come to understand was her laugh when something genuinely surprised her. They went inside. Lunch was not simple. Diane asked Victoria questions with the directness she applied to everything. About the company, about the decisions she'd made, about what she found difficult, about whether she thought she'd been lucky or good. Victoria answered all of them straight, including the one about luck, which she said was real and present, and something people who claimed their success was entirely merit-based were either lying about or hadn't examined carefully enough, which made Diane set down her spoon and look at her with an expression Ethan recognized as the one that meant, I am revising my assessment upward. But it was the moment after lunch, when Lily had taken Diane to show her something in the backyard and Ethan was in the kitchen washing up, and Victoria was at the kitchen table with a mug of tea, and Diane's worn copy of a novel she'd picked up from the side table and was reading the back of That the Real Thing Happened. Diane came back inside alone, leaving Lily to investigate something in the garden, and stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at Victoria for a moment without speaking. Victoria looked up from the book. He built his entire adult life from scratch, Diane said, without complaint and without a roadmap, and with a child who needed him to get it right. Her voice was even. He doesn't make a performance of it, and he doesn't need you to, but I need you to understand that it costs something. The years of it cost something. And he doesn't always know how to protect himself from things that could take that apart. Victoria held eye contact. I know, she said. Do you? I know because he's shown me who he is consistently since the first hour I met him, which means he's not performing for me either, which means if I handle this carelessly, the damage is real. She put the book down on the table. I don't intend to handle it carelessly. I understand what's here. Diane studied her for a long time, long enough that the kitchen silence became something substantial. Then she said, The aromatics he changed are better than mine. Don't tell him I said that. She went to refill her tea. Victoria sat at the table and did not move for a moment. And when Ethan came out of the kitchen with a dish towel over his shoulder, she looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. Something that was quietly full, like a container that had been mostly empty for a long time and had just been filled without anyone announcing the moment. Good? He asked. Good, she said. Later, in the car on the way home, Lily was in the back seat with one of her ocean books, reading in the fading afternoon light with the focused absorption she brought to anything she'd decided was worthwhile. Grandma likes her, Lily announced without looking up from the book. How do you know? Ethan asked. She shared the recipe thing. Lily turned a page. Grandma never shares the recipe things. Ethan looked in the rearview mirror at his daughter's face, bent over the book, unself-conscious and certain. He thought about the arithmetic of the months behind them. The dresser, the card, the coffee, the river, the restaurant, the living room floor with the fictional city. He thought about what Victoria had said to his mother, plainly and without performance. I understand what's here. He turned his eyes back to the road. The March light was already different from February's. Not warm yet, but aiming toward it. The gray had thinned. Things were beginning to shift in the way they shifted in late winter, not dramatically, not with announcement, but genuinely. The kind of change that had been happening underground for weeks before the surface showed any evidence. He drove, and Lily read, and the road went north to south, and the late afternoon laid itself across the Connecticut fields in long, flat bands of pale gold that almost felt like the beginning of something warmer. Spring came to Connecticut the way it always did, reluctantly, in fits and starts, with 2 warm days followed by a cold snap that made you feel foolish for having put away your winter coat. By April, the crocuses were making their argument along the front walk of Ethan's house, small and insistent in the half-frozen ground. And Lily had started leaving her jacket at school with a frequency that suggested she found the whole concept of seasonal transition personally inconvenient. The months between March and the following December were not without their difficulties. Ethan had understood, somewhere around the 3rd month, that building something real between 2 lives as structurally different as theirs was going to require a level of deliberate construction that made his most complicated cabinet installations look straightforward by comparison. The difference was that cabinetry had plans. This did not. There were arguments. Not the dramatic kind. Neither of them was built for dramatic, but the kind that came from 2 people with strong operating systems trying to run in the same space without sufficient documentation. The first real one happened in April, about 6 weeks after the lunch at Diane's, and it started over something that seemed minor and revealed something that wasn't. Victoria had been in Hartford for 3 days. On the second evening, she'd mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd spoken to her real estate agent about properties in the Hartford area. Just looking, she said, getting a sense of what was available. She said it the way she said many practical things, with the efficient neutrality of someone reporting a logistical step. Ethan had gone quiet in a way she'd apparently noticed but misread. "It's not," she started. "I'm not trying to move fast. I just thought you made a decision about your living situation as it relates to us," he said carefully, without mentioning that you were thinking about it. She looked at him. "I said I was just looking. You talked to an agent, Victoria. That's not just thinking about it." The kitchen was very quiet. She had the expression she got when she was deciding whether something was a real criticism or a misunderstanding, running it through her internal assessment. "You're right," she said after a moment. Not quickly, with the slowness of someone who was actually deciding whether it was true before saying it. "I moved on it without looping you in, and I should have. I think I did it that way because—" She paused, and the pause had more in it than usual. "Because I've spent 8 years making decisions about my life unilaterally, not out of inconsideration, out of practice. There was no one to loop in." He looked at her. The kitchen light was on, and it was getting dark outside, and the house was quiet because Lily was at Claire's for the night, and the specific intimacy of the 2 of them in this space, without the buffer of a child's presence, made everything slightly more exposed. "I know that," he said. "I'm not accusing you of bad intent. I'm telling you it landed wrong." "I understand." She set her hands flat on the counter. "I'm going to get this wrong sometimes. The recalibration from operating alone to operating with someone, I'm working on it, but it's not going to be perfect." "I know, I'm going to get things wrong too." He looked at her. "When I get them wrong, I need you to tell me directly, not manage around it." "I will." A beat. "Are we okay?" "We're okay." And then, because he was who he was, "You should have told me you were thinking about it, not because I need to control it, because it's something we should think about together." She held his gaze. "You want me closer." It wasn't a question. He answered it anyway. "Yeah." She nodded once with the decisive weight she gave to things she'd arrived at honestly. "Okay." They didn't resolve it that night into something neat because neat wasn't the point. What they did instead was stay in the kitchen and make dinner together. A collaborative production that involved 2 people learning each other's habits in a shared physical space, which had its own kind of negotiation, its own minor frictions, and small accommodations. She had an infuriating tendency to start 3 things simultaneously and trust that it would all come together. He had an equally infuriating tendency to finish one thing completely before beginning the next. They made pasta carbonara with the patient tension of 2 people discovering that compatible did not mean identical, and it was good. And the argument that wasn't quite an argument settled into something more honest than it had been before it happened. That was, Ethan thought later, the thing about the hard conversations, the ones you didn't avoid. They didn't make things easier exactly, but they made things truer. And true was more useful than easy when you were trying to build something that held. Victoria found a property in May. She told him first, before she called the agent back, sitting across from him at the kitchen table with her laptop and 3 browser tabs, and the expression she had when she was presenting a business case she believed in. It was a renovated carriage house 40 minutes from Ethan's house, close enough for the kind of presence that mattered, far enough to maintain the separateness that both of them, if they were honest, still needed. Her main residence remained in San Francisco. This would be what she called a base, which was a word she chose carefully to mean something less permanent than home, but more intentional than temporary. 40 minutes, Ethan said. I can do it in 35 on a good traffic day. You're going to get a speeding ticket within the first month. Probably, she agreed without apparent concern. He looked at the listing photos. The carriage house was old, well built, with the particular bones of New England construction, timber and stone, nothing asking to be impressive, just asking to be sound. He liked it immediately and didn't say so right away, because he wanted to look at it honestly rather than through the feeling of wanting her closer. The kitchen needs work, he said. I know. I could do it. She looked at him. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm saying I could. It's what I do. He handed the laptop back. Let me look at the space before you commit. I want to see the walls. She got the carriage house in June. He looked at the walls in May. They were fine. Better than fine, original plaster over lath, the kind that meant the structure had been cared for. He told her this standing in an empty room that smelled like old wood and potential, and she listened to him talk about load-bearing walls and cabinet placement with an attention that he had come to understand was one of her forms of affection. The way she went fully present when something you were saying mattered to you, regardless of whether it was her domain. He installed the kitchen over 3 weekends in July, with Marco's help on the second one. It was not a paid job, and Marco charged him half a case of beer and the right to never let him forget it, which Ethan accepted as a fair rate. Lily came the 3rd weekend and declared the result significantly better than a lamp, which in her architecture was the highest available compliment. Victoria stood in the finished kitchen on a Sunday evening in late July with a coffee that the new appliances had made and looked at the counters and the cabinets and the way the light from the window above the sink fell across the tile, and she said very quietly, "You built this." "We built it," he said. Technically, it was there before. "You know what I mean." He did. He let it stand. The summer moved differently than the winter had. Less urgent in its discovery, more comfortable in its accumulation. Victoria learned Lily's rhythms, the morning quiet that meant she was still processing the day ahead and shouldn't be rushed, the specific hunger that appeared at 4:30 that Ethan addressed with such automatic efficiency that Victoria started keeping the right snacks at the carriage house on the weekends Lily was there. Lily, for her part, added Victoria to her functional world with the pragmatic acceptance of a child who had already decided the verdict and wasn't going to keep relitigating it. It was not always simple. There were evenings when Victoria's work schedule invaded the weekend in ways that were unavoidable and that Lily noticed without comment, but with the particular quiet that meant she'd filed it. There were mornings when Ethan's own mood was shorter than it should have been for reasons that had nothing to do with either of them. A difficult job, a bad night's sleep, the low-grade persistent worry about his mother that lived just below the surface of his ordinary days. And Victoria had to learn the difference between the kind of quiet that wanted company and the kind that needed space. She got it wrong twice before she got it right, and she told him directly when she thought she'd misread it, which was the right approach and which he appreciated more than he said. Lily's relationship with Victoria developed in the specific lateral way that children's real relationships developed, not through big moments, but through the accumulation of small, repeated ones. Victoria attending the school's spring science fair, where Lily's project on bioluminescence won second place, and Victoria's restrained expression of pride was so clearly genuine that Lily's teacher mentioned it to Ethan afterward. Victoria sitting on the living room floor on a rainy September Saturday, while Lily explained a modification to the city's transit system with a new elevated rail line, and Victoria asking, without performance, whether the line had been engineered for the terrain or whether the terrain had been modified for the line, and Lily staring at her and saying, "You're the only adult who asked that," and Victoria saying, "It's the right question," and Lily saying, "I know." Victoria being present, consistently, at the ordinary margins of the week, a text to Ethan to say she'd be late, arriving anyway, and sitting down to dinner at 7:30 and eating cold pasta without complaint because she'd rather eat it cold with them than hot without them, and everyone around the table understanding this without it being said. There was an evening in September that Ethan would come back to for a long time after, not because it was dramatic, but because it was the opposite of dramatic. Victoria had been in San Francisco for 2 weeks, a stretch that was longer than usual because of a board meeting and a product launch that had overlapped in the way things did when your business operated across multiple time zones. She'd arrived back at the carriage house late Thursday night and driven to Ethan's on Friday after his workday, and they'd eaten dinner, the three of them. Take out Ty, because it was Friday and no one was cooking on a Friday. And after dinner, Lily had fallen asleep on the couch watching a nature documentary about the deep ocean, which she'd chosen herself and which had apparently proved too soothing to resist. Victoria was the one who noticed first. She crossed to the couch quietly, turned off the documentary, and pulled the throw blanket from the back of the couch over Lily with the same unhurried care that Ethan used when he thought no one was watching. She stood there for a moment after, looking at the sleeping child with an expression that was entirely unguarded in the way faces were when they believed themselves unobserved. Ethan watched from the doorway. He had been very deliberate over the months about not putting words on things before they were ready for words. He was a measured man. He had learned the cost of moving faster than the truth of something, and he had learned it in ways that left marks. And he had applied that learning here with the same discipline he applied to the things he built. Because building before the foundation was ready was how you got structures that looked right and failed wrong. But watching Victoria tuck a blanket around his sleeping daughter with that unguarded face, he felt something in him settle the rest of the way down. Not a new feeling, a completed one. The last tension in a joint finding its alignment. She turned and saw him. She didn't look away. "She's extraordinary," Victoria said quietly, which was the same thing she'd said in the parking lot at the restaurant in December, but it sounded different now. Not surprised, not discovering, just true in the way long-held things were true. "I know," he said, the same answer he'd given then. They stood in the quiet living room with the sleeping child between them and the October night outside the windows, and nothing required saying. It was November when the question that had been circling for months finally landed. Not from Ethan and not from Victoria, and not from Lily, who had her own version of patience that she'd apparently inherited from someone in a previous generation. It came from Diane. Ethan had driven up to Torrington alone. Lily was at a school friend's birthday party. Victoria was in Boston, and he and his mother had spent the afternoon doing the quiet domestic things they did when they had the house to themselves. She read. He fixed the storm door that had been sticking since August. They ate soup from her version of the recipe, which he still maintained was slightly inferior to his but would never say. After dinner, Diane cleared the table with the efficiency of someone who had been running a household alone for 9 years. Ethan's father had died when he was 23, a fact that had shaped him in ways he'd spent years understanding. And she settled in the chair by the window with her tea and looked at him with the reading glasses over glasses combination that meant she was about to say something direct. "What are you doing?" she asked. He looked up from his coffee. "I'm sorry?" "With Victoria. With the situation." She set her tea down. "You've been together a year. She bought a house 40 minutes from you. She goes to school events. Lily calls her by her first name and talks about her the way she talks about Claire." Diane folded her hands in her lap. "What are you doing, Ethan?" "Mom, I'm not rushing you. I'm asking what you want. There's a difference." He looked at the table. There was a scratch in the wood from a dinner 20 years ago that had never been sanded out, and he'd looked at that scratch at this table for most of his adult life. And something about its familiar presence in this specific moment made the question feel more serious than it might have otherwise. "I want to stay in this," he said. "That's not the same as knowing what this is." "I know what it is." He looked up. "I know who she is. I know who we are together." He paused, choosing the exact words. I'm afraid of moving faster than she's ready for. Her life is structured around herself. And that's not a criticism, it's a history. She's been alone at the center of her own life for a long time. And coming into ours, into Lily's, is something she's doing carefully, and I respect that. And I don't want to... Ethan, Diane's voice was patient but precise. Has she said she's not ready? He stopped. Has she indicated in any way that she's moving as carefully as you're assuming she is? He thought about Victoria at the carriage house in July, standing in the kitchen he'd built and saying you built this in the voice she used for things that mattered. He thought about September and the blanket. He thought about the way she talked about Lily, not as his daughter, which she always had, but lately as Lily, the way you used a name when someone had become a specific person to you rather than a role. No, he said slowly. Then what you have, Diane said, is a story you're telling yourself about caution that is starting to look a lot like fear. He sat with that. His mother picked up her tea. I was careful after your father died, she said, in the even tone she used for things she only said when they were genuinely necessary. I was careful for 6 years. I was careful long past the point where caution was useful and well into the territory where it was just absence dressed up as wisdom. She looked at him. I'm not telling you to hurry. I'm telling you not to mistake one for the other. He drove back to Hartford in the November dark with the heater on and the radio off, and his mother's words moving around in his mind like something that had been stationary and was now in circulation. He had always been a man who thought carefully before he spoke, before he moved, before he committed to a thing. It had served him well, mostly. It had also, he understood in the car on 44 South with the bare trees going by in the headlights, kept him at a particular distance from his own life at moments when the life was waiting for him to close the gap. He called Victoria when he got home. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she wasn't in a meeting, which at 8:30 on a Thursday meant she was at the Boston Hotel doing the reading she always did at the end of workdays. How was your mom? She asked. Good. She said something I need to think about. A pause. Good something or difficult something? Both, he said, the kind she specializes in. He could hear Victoria settling, the specific sound of someone who was already in bed or in a chair, adjusting to the frequency of a real conversation. He had learned to love that sound, the settling in. Tell me, she said. So he did. He told her about the scratch on the table and the storm door and the soup and his mother's reading glasses, and the question that had not been a rush but had been, he was beginning to understand, an accurate diagnosis of where he'd been stuck without knowing he was stuck. Victoria was quiet for a long time after he finished, longer than her usual processing quiet. I've been waiting, she said, finally. He went still. Not impatiently, she said. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't waiting because you were slow. I was waiting because I understood you were being careful, and I trusted you're careful. And I didn't want to push because I was... A pause. I was afraid of wanting something too clearly, of saying what I wanted and having it be too much. Too much for what? For what I thought you'd let yourself have. Her voice was careful and honest in the specific way it got when she was saying something that cost something. You build things for other people's lives, Ethan. You built my kitchen. You built a whole life for your daughter. And sometimes I watch you and I wonder if you've forgotten that you're allowed to build something for yourself. The house was completely quiet. Outside, a neighbor's porch light had come on, a rectangle of yellow against the November dark. He thought about what he wanted. Not abstractly, concretely, the way he thought about the practical things. What he actually wanted, in the specific terms that didn't need decorating. He wanted Lily to grow up with Victoria in her life, consistently, not as a visitor, but as a presence. He wanted to stop having Sunday evenings feel like a countdown to the moment when the house went back to its ordinary configuration. He wanted to stop managing the thing carefully and start building the thing intentionally, which was what he did with everything that mattered, and which he had been, his mother was right, afraid to do here. I want more than we have, he said. I want us to be more deliberate. About the future. About what we're building. He paused. I'm not asking you to change your life. I'm asking whether you want to build something that's ours. something that has both our names on it. The pause this time was different from all the previous ones. It was not assessment. It was not processing. It was the pause of someone who had already arrived at the answer and was deciding whether they trusted the arrival enough to say it out loud. "Yes," Victoria said. Straightforward, no hedge, no qualifier, just the word in her voice, plain and clear and real. He exhaled. He hadn't known he was holding something until he released it. "Okay," he said. "That's your word," she said, and he could hear the smile in it. The real one, the crooked, slightly uneven one. "It's the right word." "It is," she agreed. "It's the exactly right word." Not. They did not move in together that winter or that spring. The carriage house remained hers, and the two-bedroom on Fernwood Street remained his and Lily's, and both of them understood that this was not avoidance but structure. The acknowledgement that what they were building needed to be built right, which meant built to last rather than built to impress. The deliberateness they'd agreed to was not about speed. It was about intention. But things shifted in the particular way that things shifted when two people stopped navigating around a future and started navigating toward one. Victoria came to Lily's school events not as a guest, but as a fixture, and the teachers who had watched her appear over the months had long stopped needing an introduction. Lily, who had been to the carriage house enough times to have a drawer in the guest room where she left her things, began referring to it without preamble as Victoria's house, which was the name Lily gave to places that were real to her rather than theoretical. Diane came to dinner twice, and by the second time had moved from approval into the warmer territory she occupied with people she'd fully admitted into the category of family, which she indicated not through declaration but through telling Victoria the correct version of the soup recipe, which Ethan found out about 3 weeks later and chose to interpret as a deeply meaningful gesture. Claire cried at Christmas dinner, which she blamed on wine and which no one believed. Marco told Ethan at the end of a job in February, apropos of seemingly nothing, that he'd seen Ethan smile more in the past year than in the preceding 4 combined, and Ethan told him to shut up and hand him the level, and Marco said, "Yep, much more relaxed, I can tell." And they worked in comfortable silence for the rest of the afternoon, which was the language of men who had worked beside each other for years and knew when something was true and didn't need to extract it. The day Ethan went to Margaret's shop was a cold Tuesday in December, exactly a year after the dresser, which he had not planned and which he noticed only as he was parking on Alderman Street and felt the particular texture of the date sit down on him. He had a small gift, a jar of good honey from a place in Litchfield that Margaret had mentioned once, 8 months ago, in a sentence he hadn't been sure he'd remembered until he found himself standing in the store. And he had a card, plain cream, which he had written that morning at the kitchen table while Lily ate cereal and asked him what he was writing. "Something I need to say to someone," he told her. "Why can't you just say it out loud?" "Some things are better in writing." He finished the sentence and looked at it. "It makes them more real." Lily appeared to accept this, drank the rest of her cereal milk, and went to get her backpack. Margaret's tailoring shop was a narrow storefront between a dry cleaner and an accountant's office, with a window full of the kind of quiet evidence of craft, a dress form, a bolt of wool, a small hand-lettered sign, that most people walked past without reading. Ethan had been inside twice before, both times with Sophia. He pushed the door open and the small bell above it announced him. Margaret was at the work table in the back, pinning a hem with the focused patience of someone who had done it 10,000 times and still gave it full attention. She looked up. She looked at him the way she had on the day of the dresser, not with surprise exactly, but with the careful attention of someone reading a situation in real time. Then she saw his face. She set down the pincushion. "Well," she said, "I brought you something." He set the honey on the counter. He held out the card. She crossed to him and took it. She opened it and read it standing there, and the card had exactly 8 words inside. "Thank you for saying the thing." Margaret looked at the words for a moment. Her expression did the thing that his mother's expressions did. Something happened underneath the composure, briefly and honestly, and then the composure came back around it. She looked up at him. "Is she happy?" Margaret asked. Not "are you happy?" which would have been the expected question. Victoria first, which was the right order for someone who had loved her longer. "I think so," he said. "I think we're getting better at it, both of us." "She called me last week," Margaret said. "She didn't say everything. She never says everything. But she laughed in the middle of the call, and it was—" She paused. It was her actual laugh, the one I hadn't heard in a long time. He thought about the laugh on the river path, the one that caught her off guard. "Yeah," he said. "I know that laugh." Margaret nodded, folded the card once, and held it. "And Lily?" "She told Victoria she could come to the next thing, the first night they met." He smiled briefly. "She's been inviting her to the next thing ever since." Something crossed Margaret's face that was fond and satisfied and slightly undone. "That child," she said. "Yeah." Margaret looked at him for a long moment. He stood in her shop under the workroom light with the December outside the window and the bolt of wool on the table and the small bell above the door still faintly resonating from when he'd come in. "You know," she said, "I wasn't certain. When I gave you that card, I thought it was right, but I wasn't certain." "Were you scared?" he asked. "A little." She turned the card over in her hands. "I've known Victoria for 8 years, and I've never done anything like that. Told someone she existed in that way, put a door in front of them." She looked at him directly. "I knew what she was missing. I knew what you were. But knowing two things doesn't guarantee they fit." "They don't always fit easily," he said. "No. Do they now?" He thought about the argument in April and the carriage house kitchen and his mother's question at the table with the old scratch in the wood. He thought about September and the blanket and Victoria's unguarded face in the lamplight. He thought about the word yes on the phone in November, plain and clear, without a hedge in it. "Not easily," he said, "but honestly, which is better?" Margaret smiled. It was the same small, unapologetic smile from the day she'd told him the dresser had told her what she needed to know. Except now it was warmer. The smile of someone whose bet had come in, not in the way of a gamble won, but in the way of something believed in that turned out to be true. "Go home, Ethan," she said. "You have people waiting." He did. He had a daughter who needed picking up from school, and a woman 40 minutes away who had texted that morning to say she was cooking dinner at the carriage house, and that she had made an optimistic attempt at carbonara, and that he should manage his expectations accordingly, which made him smile at his phone in a way that Marco would absolutely have noted and commented on. He went back out into the December street. The cold was the same as last year, the same gray sky, the same gap between collar and jaw, but it felt, he thought, different, not warmer. Just less like something to endure and more like something to simply be in, which was a distinction that probably sounded small and was not. He sat in the truck for a moment before starting it. He thought about what a year did to a person when you let it. Not the calendar kind of year, the kind built from specific things. A dresser too heavy for one person to move. A card with 8 words on it, and a woman brave enough to say the thing she wasn't asked to say. A 7-year-old who had decided, with characteristic efficiency, that a billionaire she'd met over soup was worth a second look. A mother who had asked the right question at the right table. A phone call in November in which one word had changed the quality of everything that came after it. None of it had been clean. None of it had gone to plan, mostly because there hadn't been a plan. Just two people feeling their way towards something real through the ordinary mess of imperfect lives and competing demands, and the specific, stubborn difficulty of trusting something you couldn't control. That was the thing, he thought, that no one told you clearly enough, that the worthwhile things didn't arrive in order. They arrived in dresser-shaped packages, in cards slipped into your hand in a half-painted room, in the slightly crooked smile of a woman trying not to show you that she was nervous, in a 7-year-old's matter-of-fact invitation, "You can come next time." They arrived in the small, repeated moments that didn't announce themselves as important until you looked back and understood that they were. They always had been, and the only mistake would have been not showing up for them. He started the truck. He had somewhere to be.